Colonel Hargrove snatched the rifle directly out of Emma Carter's hands, yanked it so hard she stumbled forward. Then he threw it onto the concrete floor in front of every operator on that range. "Get her out." His voice was ice. "Now, before I have her arrested." Nobody moved, because 30 seconds ago, this woman in a faded gray hoodie had just put 5 rounds through a target at 1,100 meters in a crosswind, while Hargrove's best sniper couldn't manage 400. And Hargrove knew it. That's exactly why he wanted her gone. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. Now let's go back to where this all began. The first time Daniel Walker noticed her, he almost didn't. That was the thing about Emma Carter. She had a way of existing in a space without demanding anything from it. No noise, no performance, no need for anyone to look her way. She simply arrived, set up her equipment with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times before, and began shooting. Walker had been a Master Chief in the Navy SEALs for going on 19 years. He had served in places the United States government still officially claimed he had never been. He had trained men who went on to become legends in the special operations community, and he had buried men whose names would never appear in any newspaper. He thought he had seen every kind of shooter there was. He was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the California coast couldn't decide between fog and sun, and the Naval Base Coronado shooting range smelled the way it always did: gunpowder, cold metal, and the faint salt edge of the Pacific blowing in from the west. Walker had arrived early to run qualification drills with a group of junior SEAL candidates who were still struggling with their long-range fundamentals. He expected a routine morning: coffee, noise, the crack of rifles. The usual frustration of watching young men learn the hard way that shooting a rifle accurately at distance was not something your body agreed to do naturally. What he did not expect was the woman already positioned at the far end of the range alone, working through a sequence of shots that made him stop walking mid-stride. She was wearing jeans and a faded gray hoodie. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot that had nothing to do with style and everything to do with keeping it out of her face. She was shooting a bolt-action rifle that Walker recognized as a civilian variant of the kind of platform snipers trained on, but nothing exotic, nothing that should have produced what he was watching. The target was at 800 meters, in a crosswind. She hit it 5 times in 40 seconds without adjusting her position. Not 5 shots near the target, not 5 shots in the general vicinity of where a skilled shooter might group. 5 shots that, when Walker later walked the distance and looked at the paper, were clustered so tightly he could have covered them all with the palm of his hand. He stood there for a long moment with his coffee going cold in his hand, and he watched her work. He watched the way she breathed, the way her shoulders settled before each shot like she was releasing something rather than holding something, the way her hands never gripped, never white-knuckled, never showed any of the tension that crept into even experienced shooters when they were pushing distance. She looked like she was having a quiet conversation with the rifle, like they had an arrangement. Chief Walker, one of his junior candidates, a 23-year-old named Pratt, appeared at his elbow. "You want us to set up at lanes 3 through 7 or—" "Hold on," Walker said. Pratt followed his gaze. "Oh yeah, she's been here since before I got here. Range officer said she's got a civilian guest pass, some kind of—" Pratt paused, searching for the right word. "Hobby shooter, I think. Does this a few times a week?" Walker said nothing. Pratt watched the woman for a moment. "She's pretty good for a—" "Don't," Walker said quietly. Pratt closed his mouth. They watched her fire 3 more shots. 3 more perfect impacts. Then she paused, rolled her right shoulder, once checked something on her scope with a motion so practiced it was almost invisible, and continued. "Set up at 3 through 7, Walker said finally. "I'll be there in a minute." He didn't move for another 10 minutes. By the time he pulled himself away and walked to where his candidates were setting up, he had already made a decision. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know her name or her history or how she ended up on his range shooting like that, but he knew with the same certainty that had kept him alive through a decade and a half of combat operations that there was nothing hobbyist about what he had just seen. Whatever Emma Carter was, she was not a hobby shooter. The question was what she actually was, and why she was here. Over the next 2 weeks, Walker watched her with the quiet, patient attention he applied to everything he considered worth understanding. He was careful not to be obvious about it. He had learned long ago that people who wanted to be left alone had a finely tuned instinct for surveillance, and something told him this woman fell into that category. So he watched from distance. He noted patterns. She arrived between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, always before the range reached full capacity. She always worked alone. She never used the same lane twice in a row, rotating through positions in a pattern that didn't repeat itself on any schedule he could identify, which meant she was either random about it or deliberately unpredictable. And something about the careful, economical way she moved told him it wasn't random. She never shot for speed. Every sequence she ran was measured deliberate with pauses between shots that most competitive shooters would have considered wasteful. She seemed to be working through something in her head between each trigger pull, processing something, checking something internal that had nothing to do with what was visible on paper. She spoke to almost no one. Twice Walker saw range safety officers approach her routine check-ins, the kind of brief conversations that were standard protocol on any military-adjacent facility. Both times she answered whatever was asked, nodded, and returned to her work. Friendly enough, revealing nothing. Then came the morning that changed everything. His name was Sergeant Marcus Webb, 24 years old, Marine Scout Sniper Program, referred to the range at Coronado by his unit commander after failing his long-range qualification for the second time. Webb had the physical attributes: good vision, steady hands, legitimate commitment to the work. What he didn't have was the ability to manage his breathing under pressure. When it mattered, when the qualification card was on the table and someone was watching, his chest locked up, his groups opened, and his rounds walked away from the target like they were looking for somewhere better to be. Walker had seen it before. It wasn't a technical failure. It was a mental one. And those were the hardest kind to fix because the shooter always knew exactly what was happening and couldn't stop it, which made it worse. Webb was at the range that morning running his fourth practice session of the week, which told Walker the young Marine was serious about fixing the problem. He had set up at lane 4 and was methodically working a 600-meter target and methodically missing it by margins that had nothing to do with his actual capability. Walker was watching from the bench area, drinking coffee, pretending to review a training schedule, when he saw Emma Carter set down her own rifle. She had been working 3 lanes to Webb's left. She hadn't spoken to the Marine, hadn't looked at him more than the casual, peripheral awareness any experienced range shooter maintains about the people around them. But she had set down her rifle, and now she was watching Webb with an expression Walker couldn't read from his angle. Webb fired again, missed, not by much, maybe 8 inches at 600 meters, which was good for a lot of shooters, but not acceptable for Scout Sniper qualification. But he could see the young man's shoulders drop with the familiar slump of someone who has just confirmed his own worst fear about himself. Walker saw Emma take a breath. He saw her hesitate. He watched her make some kind of internal decision. She walked over to Webb's lane. Walker set down his coffee. She stood beside the Marine for a moment without speaking, and Walker was too far away to hear what she said when she finally did speak, but he saw Webb look up at her. The young Marine's expression was the automatic defensiveness of someone who has been receiving unsolicited advice for weeks and is tired of it. Walker knew that look. He had worn it himself 20 years ago. Whatever Emma said next, it wasn't what Webb expected. The defensiveness dropped. Not completely, but enough. He turned his body slightly toward her, which was the unconscious signal that he was actually listening rather than just waiting for her to finish. She spoke for less than a minute. Walker would later learn she had said almost nothing about technique. She hadn't corrected his scope settings or suggested a different position or offered any of the 15 tactical adjustments that the Marines instructors had been cycling through for weeks. She had asked him one question. "What are you afraid of right now?" Webb had stared at her. "Not out there," she had said, nodding toward the target. "In here." She had touched 2 fingers briefly to her own sternum. "What's in there that's louder than everything else?" The Marine was quiet for a long moment. "Missing," he said finally. "In front of—" He stopped. "When it counts." Emma nodded, just nodded like he had confirmed something she already knew. "So right now," she said, "you're not shooting at that target. You're shooting at the fear. And you keep missing the fear, so you keep missing the target." Webb looked at her. "Shoot the target," she said simply. "Not the fear. The fear is not your problem today. It's just noise. Ignore the noise." Then she did something unexpected. She walked back to her own lane, picked up her rifle, moved her target out to 1,000 meters a distance that made the range safety officer glance up from his booth and fired 3 shots. Not to show off, to demonstrate something specific, the absolute stillness that preceded each shot, the quality of presence that looked almost like absence, the way her body stopped performing and simply existed in the moment of the trigger pull. Then she looked at Webb. He fired. The round hit center mass of his target. Walker stood up from the bench. Webb fired again. Another center hit. Then 3 more, each one confirming the previous one, each one landing in a group that, for the first time in weeks, actually looked like what the young Marine was capable of. Webb stood up from his prone position and stared at the target display for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma. She was already returning to her own work, her attention back on her own lane, her own sequence, as if the intervention had been so minor it wasn't worth acknowledging. "Ma'am," Webb said. She glanced at him. "Thank you." She gave him a small nod. That was all. Then she went back to shooting. Walker walked to the range safety officer's booth. "The woman in lane 7, he said. "Emma Carter. What do you know about her?" The officer shrugged. "Civilian guest pass issued through base admin. She's been coming for about 3 months. Always early, always quiet, never causes any problems. Range qualified, on intake scored." The officer paused and pulled up something on his screen. He looked at it, looked at Walker. "Chief, her intake qualification score was how much over the ceiling?" The officer was quiet for a moment. "Significantly." Walker nodded slowly. "Who issued her pass?" The officer checked his screen again. "Comes through a general administrative authorization. No specific unit listed, no sponsor named." He looked up again with an expression that said he had not until this moment thought to question this. "That's not standard." "No," Walker agreed. "It's not." That afternoon, Walker ran Emma Carter's name through every search channel available to him at his clearance level. He found almost nothing. A driver's license, an address in San Diego residential, nothing unusual. A vehicle registration, a credit history that showed the ordinary financial patterns of an ordinary person living an ordinary life. No military service record, no federal employment record, no law enforcement background, no competitive shooting registrations or records anywhere in the national databases, which was strange by itself because a shooter of her caliber would have had to come from somewhere, would have left some kind of competitive trail. It was like she had existed for the past 3 months and almost not at all before that. Walker had encountered this specific pattern before. Not often, but enough times to recognize it. He went to find Chris Donovan. Donovan was arguably the finest combat sniper Walker had ever personally worked alongside. 15 years in the SEAL teams, 3 combat tours, confirmed engagements at distances that his own community had initially refused to believe until the evidence was reviewed. He was also the most instinct-driven operator. Walker knew a man who trusted his gut the way other men trusted GPS, and whose gut had a better record than most satellites. Walker found him in the armory. "I need you to come to the range tomorrow morning," Walker said. 6 o'clock. Donovan looked up from the maintenance he was running. "Why bother?" "There's someone I want you to see." Donovan set down the cleaning rod. He looked at Walker for a moment. "When you say someone you want me to see, I mean exactly that, someone shooting. I want a second set of eyes, your eyes specifically." Donovan was quiet. "Is this a problem situation or a—" He searched for the right word. "I don't know yet," Walker said honestly. "That's why I want you there." Donovan showed up the next morning at 5:50, which was Donovan's way of saying the thing mattered. Walker was already at the range when Emma arrived at 6:12. She went through her normal setup routine without looking toward the 2 senior operators, watching her from the bench area. And Walker felt the first edge of something that might have been guilt. They were scrutinizing her. She hadn't done anything to deserve scrutiny, except exist in a way that didn't add up. Donovan watched her for 20 minutes without saying a word. She ran 3 sequences, 500 meters, then 750, then 900, adjusting for the morning wind that was coming off the water, with the annoying variability of coastal air shifting between 3 and 7 knots and changing direction every few minutes. The 900-meter shots in that wind were the kind of problem that required either excellent equipment, excellent mathematics, or a level of intuitive reading of conditions that most shooters spent careers developing and never fully achieved. She handled it like it was routine. because for her, Walker was beginning to understand it was. Finally, Donovan said, okay. Okay, what? Okay, I see what you're seeing. He was quiet for another moment. Where did she come from? That's the problem, Walker said. I can't find where she came from. Donovan's eyes moved to Walker. Something shifted in his expression. You ran her. Everything I have access to. And nothing that explains this. Donovan looked back at Emma. She had moved her target out to 1,100 meters and was taking her time with the setup. Checking wind, checking elevation, moving with the patient economy of someone who was in absolutely no hurry and had no interest in rushing any part of the process. There's a short list of programs, Donovan said carefully, that could produce a shooter like that and then make the record of it disappear. I know, Walker said. And most of those programs are programs that neither of us is supposed to know exist. I know that too. Donovan said nothing for a long moment. They both watched Emma settle into position, find her breath, and fire. The round hit at 1,100 meters, and even from this distance, Walker could tell it was center. Donovan didn't react visibly, but Walker saw his jaw tighten. What do you want to do? Donovan asked. Walker thought about Webb, about the way the young Marine's shoulders had dropped after he missed, about the 5 words Emma had offered shoot the target, not the fear, and how they had done what weeks of technical instruction hadn't. I want to know who she is, Walker said, and I want to know why she's here. You could just ask her. I have a feeling she'll say she's a hobby shooter. Donovan almost smiled. What's your alternative? Walker picked up his coffee. It had gone cold again. I'm going to stop waiting for her to come to me, he said, and start giving her a reason to show us what she actually knows. The following morning, Walker arranged something. He called in 4 of his senior SEAL sniper instructors men he trusted completely, men whose egos were secure enough that they wouldn't be threatened by what he was about to propose. He brought in 2 Marine Scout snipers and a pair of Army Special Forces snipers who were at Coronado for a joint training evolution. He set up a more complex shooting problem at their range-moving targets, variable distance, simulated wind data, the kind of multi-factor problem that qualified the best-trained military snipers in the world as advanced practitioners of their discipline. And he made sure Emma Carter's lane was adjacent to where all of this was happening. He told himself this was operational information gathering. He told himself he needed to understand what he was dealing with on his range. Both of those things were true. He also knew he was engineering a situation. And something about Emma Carter made him feel even then that she would see through it. He was right. She saw through it immediately. Walker watched her arrive take in the setup with a single long sweep of her eyes and almost smile. The ghost of something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite resignation, but existed somewhere between the two there for half a second on her face before she locked it down and walked to her equipment. She set up in her usual methodical way. And then, because Emma Carter had apparently decided to let him have this one, she played along. One of Walker's senior instructors, a SEAL named Garrett, was working the most difficult problem in the sequence, a target moving laterally at 700 meters, with a wind that was pulling 3 knots from the right. It was a legitimate challenge. Garrett was good. He was missing by a narrow margin that told Walker he was reading the wind correctly, but slightly miscalculating the target's movement rate. Emma watched Garrett for 2 minutes. Then she spoke. You're giving it 1.5 feet, she said. Her voice was quiet, completely without performance, like she was noting something factual. It needs 2. Garrett looked at her. He had been told the woman in the adjacent lane was a civilian guest shooter. He had the expression of a man recalibrating rapidly. You timed it. I counted it, she said. 3-second cycle across the aperture. 2 feet of lead at that wind speed and distance. Maybe 2.25. She paused. Try 2 and see what happens. Garrett tried 2. He hit the target. Then he hit it again and again. The other instructors had stopped their own work. Walker watched from behind the line very still as the range fell into the kind of silence that happens when a group of highly skilled people will arrive at the same understanding simultaneously. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Donovan, who had been standing at Walker's left shoulder, reached out and touched Walker's arm. Watch, Donovan said quietly. Walker didn't understand what he meant until he saw it. Donovan was already moving toward Emma, not to confront her, not to question her. He walked with the measured deliberateness of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it, and when he reached Emma Carter's position, he stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Emma looked back at him, waiting. Donovan reached down to the rifle sling at his shoulder. He lifted his own rifle, his personal rifle, the one Walker knew he had carried through 3 combat deployments, the one he maintained with a discipline that bordered on ritual. He lifted it and held it out to Emma Carter with both hands fists. Then he stepped back. 1 step, 2, 3, clear of her position. Every person on that range understood what they were seeing. In the community, they all came from a man's rifle was not a thing you handed to a stranger. It was not a thing you handed to someone you had just met or someone you weren't certain of. It was not a loan or a courtesy or a gesture of politeness. You handed it to someone you trusted without qualification. Donovan had handed his rifle to Emma Carter and stepped back, and in doing so had told everyone present, Walker, the instructors, the candidates, every operator standing behind that firing line, exactly what he thought. Emma looked at the rifle in her hands for a moment. She looked at Donovan. He said nothing, just waited. She turned toward the range. She fired 5 shots. Walker would think about those 5 shots for a long time afterward. He would struggle to explain them to people who weren't there because the numbers, a lone 5 rounds, 1,100 meters, a crosswind that was running between 4 and 6 knots and had been shifting direction unpredictably all morning, told only part of what happened. The part that could be measured. The part that could be entered into a logbook and discussed in technical terms by people who understood ballistics. The part that couldn't be measured was the quality of stillness she moved through, the complete absence of performance. She wasn't demonstrating anything. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply doing what she did in the way she had apparently always done it, and the rounds went where she intended them to go because they always did. 5 shots, 5 perfect impacts. Nobody applauded. Walker had been on enough ranges in enough contexts to know that real appreciation among this kind of professional population never sounded like a crowd. It sounded like silence. The particular silence that falls when people who have spent years mastering something watch someone else do that thing at a level that resets their understanding of what's possible. That silence. That's what Emma Carter got. She held the rifle for another second, then turned and held it back out to Donovan. He took it, nodded once. Then she began packing her equipment. Walker moved. He crossed the range in about 20 seconds, walking fast without running, and reached her just as she was collapsing the bipod on her own rifle. She didn't look up. She knew he was there. He was certain she had tracked him from the moment he started moving. Emma, she continued with the bipod. Chief Walker. He had not told her his name. He noted this, did not comment on it. I need 5 minutes, he said. I figured. She got the bipod folded and straightened, and then she did look at him. Her eyes were a particular shade of gray that matched the California sky on a morning like this one, and they were not unkind, but they were not giving him anything either. You've been watching me for 2 weeks. Yes. You ran my name. Yes. She nodded slowly, unsurprised. And you didn't find much. No. And now you want to know who I am. Now I want to know why someone who can do what you just did is spending their mornings alone on my range and calling herself a hobby shooter. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who has been caught in a small lie and finds it more weary than embarrassing. I like shooting, she said. So do I, Walker said, but that's not what's happening here. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past him at the range at Donovan still standing where she had left him, at the other instructors and candidates who were trying very hard to appear as though they weren't watching, at the target display showing the data from her 5 shots. Something moved across her face, something old and complicated and not quite pain but adjacent to it. I'm not looking for anything, she said finally. I'm not here for a reason. She stopped, started again. I need it somewhere familiar. That's all. Walker was quiet. Familiar, he repeated. She lifted her rifle case. I'll get my guest pass revoked if it's a problem. I didn't say it was a problem. Walker stepped slightly to the side so she wasn't speaking directly past him. I said I had questions. Most people do. She settled the case strap on her shoulder. I don't have answers for most of them. I'm not asking about classified operations or program designations or anything you can't talk about, Walker said. I'm asking about you, about what I just saw, about, he stopped, chose his words, about what you said to Sergeant Webb last week. Her eyes came back to his, sharper now. You watched that? Yes. and you waited a week to bring it up. I was giving you room, he said. I don't like crowding people. Something shifted in her expression. Slight, but real. Shoot the target, she said quietly, not the fear. She looked at Walker steadily. You're a sniper instructor, Chief. You know exactly what I meant by that. I do, he said. What I want to understand is how you knew to say it. How you looked at that Marine for 2 minutes and knew exactly which one sentence would fix what weeks of his instructors hadn't fixed. She was quiet. That's not hobby shooting, Walker said. That's not even just excellent shooting. That's something else entirely. Emma Carter looked at him for what felt like a long time. The range noise continued around them, the distant crack of other rifles, the range safety officer's periodic announcements, the baseline noise of a military training facility moving through its morning. She stood in the middle of all of it, in her gray hoodie and her jeans, and she looked like a woman making a very specific kind of calculation. Not about whether to trust him, about how much. I have to go, she said. I know. Walker reached into his pocket and produced a card, just his name and a number. Nothing else on it. He held it out. When you want to talk. She looked at the card for a moment, then she took it. She turned and walked off the range without looking back. Walker stood where she had left him and watched her go, and he felt with the same certainty that had guided his best operational decisions through 15 years of service, that he had just met someone who was carrying a weight that no one on earth should be carrying alone. He didn't know her story yet. I didn't know what program she had served in, or what missions she had run, or what she had lost. He didn't know why her records had been erased, or who had erased them, or what the cost of that erasure had been to the woman living inside it. But he knew this much. Whatever Emma Carter was carrying, she had been carrying it alone for a very long time. And somewhere in the past 3 months, she had walked onto his range with a rifle and a faded gray hoodie and found something here that felt just barely. Just enough like the place where she used to belong. He looked back at the range. Donovan was still standing at the firing line looking out at the target display. Walker walked over to him. They stood together for a moment. What do you think? Walker said finally. Donovan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was the careful, measured tone of a man choosing his words with the same precision he applied to everything else. I think, Donovan said, that whoever trained her spent a very long time on someone who was already exceptional. And then I think something happened, and then I think she disappeared. He paused. And now she's here. Walker nodded. And I think, Donovan continued, that she's here because she doesn't have anywhere else to go that makes sense to her anymore, and that this range is the one place in the world where she still feels like herself. Walker looked out at the empty lane where Emma had been standing an hour ago. That's what I think too, he said. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Donovan picked up his rifle and slung it. She's going to come back, he said. It wasn't a question. I know. And when she does, Walker thought about the card he'd handed her, about the way she had looked at it before she took it, about the weight in her eyes that she kept controlled and contained, but couldn't entirely hide from someone who had been carrying his own version of the same weight for a decade and a half. When she does, Walker said, we're going to listen. That's all. Just listen. He picked up his own coffee cup from the bench, cold again. He looked at it for a moment, then set it back down. Behind him, the range was filling up for the morning. Rifles cracking. Young operators finding their fundamentals, making their mistakes, building the foundation of skills that would someday be the difference between coming home and not coming home. And Walker understood in the way that the most important understandings tend to arrive not as revelation, but as slow recognition that Emma Carter had walked onto this range 3 months ago, not because she needed somewhere familiar. She had walked onto this range because she still had something to give. She just hadn't decided yet if she was willing to give it. The question was whether he could create the right conditions for her to make that choice. I would spend a long time thinking about how to do that, and in the end, the answer would be simpler than he expected. Not a challenge, not an argument, not an official request or a classified briefing or a formal call to duty. Just a young operator struggling, and a woman who had never in her entire life been able to walk past that without stopping. She came back the next morning. Walker hadn't expected that. He had given her the card and watched her walk off the range and told himself she needed time, maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe she would never call at all. He had prepared himself for the possibility that Emma Carter would simply disappear again, the way she had apparently disappeared before quietly and completely leaving nothing behind except the memory of 5 perfect shots and a question that had no answer. Instead, she was back at 6:08, setting up in lane 7, moving through her routine like the previous day hadn't happened. Like Donovan hadn't handed her his rifle. Like Walker hadn't chased her across the range with a business card and 1,000 unasked questions. Like none of it had landed on her at all. Walker watched from the bench and said nothing. He let her shoot for 40 minutes before he walked over. She heard him coming. Of course she did. She finished the shot she was preparing, confirmed the impact on her display, and then straightened and turned to face him before he reached her position. The card he had given her was visible in the left breast pocket of her hoodie, the corner of it sticking up just enough to be seen. He noticed that. He chose not to mention it. "You came back," he said. "I said I like shooting. You also said you were a hobby shooter." The corner of her mouth pulled slightly. "I said I like shooting. You inferred the rest." Walker looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and looked out at the range where his morning group was already assembling at the far end. Junior candidates running preliminary checks, the background noise of a training day beginning. "There's a young operator," he said. "Name is Kowalski. 25 years old, SEAL candidate, technically qualified in every single category except one. He can't shoot in low light. Not accurately. Something shuts down in him when the visibility drops and he can't get it back. His instructors have been working the problem for 6 weeks." Emma said nothing. "He qualifies in 4 days," Walker continued. "If he doesn't pass the low-light assessment, he's out of the program." He turned back to her. She was looking at him with an expression that was part recognition and part resignation, and not at all surprised. "You're not asking me a question," she said. "No," Walker said, "I'm not. You're telling me a story and waiting to see what I do with it. Is it working?" She held his gaze for a long beat. Then she picked up her rifle and her case and walked past him toward the center of the range without a word. Walker followed at a distance. Kowalski was at lane 9 running a preliminary drill in full daylight, his numbers clean and solid in the way they always were when the light was good. He was a squared-away young man with good instincts in the physical conditioning that the program demanded, in a specific technical problem that was going to end his career in 4 days if nobody fixed it. Walker had watched 3 different instructors throw 3 different solutions at the problem and watched all 3 solutions fail. Emma walked to the lane beside Kowalski and set up her equipment. She did not speak to the young operator. She did not look at him directly. She simply began working her own drill, and Walker watched Kowalski become aware of her, the way people always became aware of Emma Carter, gradually, then all at once. Kowalski shot a clean group at 400 meters. He checked his display and reset. Emma fired once at 600, dead center. Kowalski glanced over, looked back at his own setup, fired again. This went on for 20 minutes, Emma shooting her own work, Kowalski shooting his, neither of them acknowledging the other. And yet Walker could see it happening, whatever it was. Emma was doing, whatever quiet frequency she was transmitting. Kowalski's shoulders were dropping. His breath was settling. The tight, over-controlled quality that crept into his technique when he was aware of being evaluated was unwinding degree by degree because the woman beside him wasn't evaluating him. She was just shooting. And something about the absolute normalcy of her presence was giving him permission to be normal too. Then Walker signaled the range safety officer. The lights dropped, not all the way. The low-light simulation the range used wasn't full darkness. It was the difficult gray zone of dusk or heavy overcast, enough visibility to see the target, but not enough to trust what you were seeing, the lighting condition that was responsible for more field errors than almost any other variable in combat operations. Kowalski's technique changed immediately. Walker could see it from 30 feet back. The young operator's body tightened. His breathing patterns shifted. The clean, economical movements he'd been running in full light became something more effortful, more deliberate in the wrong way. The kind of deliberate that comes from compensating rather than performing. He fired, missed by 14 inches, fired again, 12 inches. Walker heard the young man exhale through his nose, the sound of controlled frustration, the sound of someone watching themselves fail in real time and not being able to stop it. Then Emma spoke. "Don't look at the target." Kowalski stopped. He turned his head toward her slightly without lifting his cheek from the stock. "Ma'am." "You're trying to see it," Emma said. Her voice was quiet, even conversational, like she was explaining something obvious that he had simply never been told. You can't see it, not the way you're trying to. The light doesn't work that way, and your eyes don't work that way, and you already know both of those things, which is why you're getting tight. She paused. Stop trying to see the target. Feel the line. Feel the You know where it is, she said. You've been shooting this range all morning. You know the distance, you know the elevation, you know the wind. None of that changed when the light dropped. The target didn't move. Your data didn't change. Another pause. Your eyes are lying to you and you're believing them. Stop believing them. Shoot what you know, not what you can see. Silence. Kowalski was still for a long moment. Then he fired. The round hit 6 inches from center. Not perfect, but it hit. He fired again. 4 inches. Again, 2 inches. Walker stood very still. The fourth round was center mass. Kowalski let out a long, slow breath. He lifted his head from the scope and stared at the target display, and then turned to look at Emma Carter with an expression. Walker recognized the expression of someone whose world has just been quietly rearranged. How did you? He stopped. Started again. Who are you? Oh. Emma was already resetting her own position. Keep going, she said. You've got 4 more in the magazine. Kowalski turned back to his rifle. He shot the 4 remaining rounds. 3 of them were center. 1 was 2 inches out. When he finally stood up, Emma was already breaking down her setup. He watched her for a moment with that same rearranged expression, like he was trying to reconcile what had just happened with everything he thought he understood about skill and instruction and the kind of knowledge that could be passed in 30 seconds of conversation. Thank you, he said. She nodded once. I mean it, he said. I've been working this for 6 weeks and nobody. He stopped himself. Thank you. She looked at him then, really looked at him, the kind of direct attention she rarely offered anyone, and something in her expression shifted into something warmer. Something that existed underneath the careful control she maintained over everything visible about herself. You already knew how to do it, she said. I just told you to stop arguing with yourself about it. Then she picked up her case and walked off the lane. Walker caught up with her near the equipment storage area. She was moving fast and he had to push his pace to close the distance, which he suspected was intentional. Kowalski's going to pass that qualification, he said. Probably, she agreed, not slowing. Because of what you just did. Because of what he just did, I didn't fire the rounds. Emma, he said her name and she stopped. Turned. Walker chose his next words the way he chose everything carefully with an awareness of consequence. I've been doing this for 19 years. I have trained some of the best shooters this military has produced. What you just did in there is not something I have seen an instructor do. I don't mean a civilian instructor. I mean any instructor. He held her gaze. Where does that come from? She was quiet for a long time. The range noise continued around them. Rifles, commands, the rhythm of a training day. Experience, she said finally. What kind of experience? She looked at him steadily. The kind you don't write down. Walker nodded slowly. He had expected that answer, had prepared himself for it. Okay, he said. I'm not asking for a file number or a program designation or anything that crosses a line you're not willing to cross. I'm asking you to consider something. She waited. There are 23 candidates on this base right now, Walker said, who are going to go through qualification in the next 30 days. Some of them are going to pass. Some of them have problems that their instructors haven't been able to fix. And some of those problems, he stopped. Some of them are going to get those operators killed someday because we missed something, because we didn't have the right person in the right place at the right moment to say the right thing. Emma's jaw tightened slightly, just slightly, but Walker caught it. I'm not asking you to reveal anything, he said. I'm asking you to shoot. Same as you've been doing every morning, just maybe not alone. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved to the range, then back to him. You don't know what you're asking, she said quietly. I know that whatever you're carrying is heavy, Walker said, and I know you've been carrying it by yourself for long enough that you've forgotten there's another way. Something flickered across her face, gone so fast he almost missed it. Pain, maybe, or recognition, or the specific ache of someone who has been seen accurately when they were not prepared to be seen at all. I'll think about it, she said. She walked away. Walker let her go. That afternoon, Walker was in his office when Colonel Hargrove called. He knew the call was coming. He had known it since the morning after Donovan handed Emma his rifle, since the moment the story started moving through the base, the way stories always move through closed communities, which was immediately and completely, and without any regard for who wanted it contained. Someone had talked. Someone always talked. And Hargrove, who ran base operations with the territorial vigilance of a man who treated his jurisdiction like personal property, had gotten the information and done what Hargrove always did with information he didn't control. "I made a problem out of it. Tell me about the civilian on your range," Hargrove said. No greeting, no preamble. Hargrove had never been interested in anything that didn't move the conversation toward what he wanted. "Her name is Emma Carter," Walker said. "She has a valid guest pass through base admin, and I know what her pass says. I'm asking what she's doing on my range, interfering with active training operations." Walker kept his voice even. "She's not interfering with anything, Colonel. She's been helpful to— I don't want civilians being helpful to my operators," Hargrove said, and his voice had the particular edge it got when he was about to stop arguing and start deciding. "I want to know where she came from, who authorized her access, and why a woman with no military record and no verifiable professional background is receiving deference from your senior instructors." Walker was quiet for a beat. "With respect, Colonel, she's receiving deference because she's earned it. She's a civilian." "Yes, sir." "On my range." "Yes, sir." "Walker," Hargrove's voice dropped, "I want her pass reviewed. I want her access suspended pending a full background review, and I want it done today." Walker felt something settle in him, the particular kind of cold clarity that arrived when a situation revealed itself fully and he understood exactly where he stood. "Colonel," he said carefully, "suspending her access based on what she can do rather than anything she's done wrong is going to be difficult to justify through official channels. I'll determine what's difficult to justify." "Yes, sir. But I'd ask you to consider that we have 3 operators in the next certification window who have made measurable improvement in the past 48 hours directly because of—" "I don't care," Hargrove said flatly. "Get it done." The line went dead. Walker sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Donovan. "Hargrove just suspended her access," he said without introduction. Donovan was quiet. "On what basis?" "No stated basis, pending review." "Which means he has no basis and he's buying time to manufacture one." "That's my read." Another silence. "What do you want to do?" Walker thought about Emma Carter's face when he had said, "You've forgotten there's another way." The flicker of something real underneath the control. The weight she carried that she had carried alone long enough to stop expecting anyone to notice. "I'm going to talk to her before she finds out through official channels," Walker said. "She deserves that. And after Walker paused. "After, I'm going to figure out what Hargrove is actually afraid of. Because this isn't about guest pass protocol. A man like Hargrove doesn't make personal calls about range access policy. Something about Emma Carter specifically put him on the phone." Donovan said nothing for a moment. "Then you think he knows who she is?" "I think," Walker said slowly, "that he knows exactly who she is, and I think that's the problem." He found her the next morning before she reached the range entrance. She was walking from the parking area, rifle case over one shoulder, moving with the same quiet economy she applied to everything, and she stopped when she saw him standing at the gate. She read his expression before he said a word. "My pass was pulled," she said. "Not a question. Suspended pending review," Walker said. "I'm sorry, I wanted to tell you before—" "It's fine." Her voice was flat, controlled. "It's not fine. This is Hargrove overreaching and I'm working on Walker." She said his name with a firmness that stopped him. "It's fine. This is what happens. This is always what happens." She shifted the strap on her shoulder. "I should have known better than to—" She stopped. Reset. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he said. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Care about this." She looked away. "It makes everything harder." Walker stepped slightly closer, lowered his voice without making it softer. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She waited. "Does Hargrove know you?" The stillness that came over her was different from her shooting stillness. This was the stillness of someone who has just heard the question they have been dreading and is deciding in real time how to answer it. "Not personally," she said carefully, "but he knows of you." A pause that lasted exactly one beat too long. "Possibly. From the program." Her jaw tightened. I'm not asking for details, Walker said. I'm asking because if Hargrove is pulling your access because of something connected to your service history, that changes what this is. That changes what I can do about it. There's nothing to do about it, she said. There might be. Walker. There might be, he repeated steady and quiet. Let me try. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was doing something to her face that made the exhaustion visible beneath the control. The years of it, the specific weariness of someone who has been protecting a wound for so long that they've forgotten what it felt like before the wound was there. Why, she said. The word came out smaller than she intended, more honest. Why does it matter to you? Walker thought about Webb's shoulders dropping after she spoke, about Kowalski putting Round's center mass in low light for the first time in 6 weeks, about Donovan handing over his rifle with the complete trust of a man who had spent a career being precise about where he placed his trust. Because what you know, Walker said, is going to save lives. And somebody decided that saving lives was less important than keeping a secret. And I've been doing this job long enough to know that's the worst trade anyone can make. Emma Carter said nothing, but she didn't walk away. That was something. Walker went to see Hargrove that afternoon. He requested a formal meeting through the aide's desk, which was the kind of move that told Hargrove he was being documented, that this conversation was going on record, whether Hargrove liked it or not. The colonel kept him waiting 40 minutes, which was also a move, and Walker sat outside the office and read through Kowalski's training file and waited with the patience that 2 decades of special operations service had built into him like structural steel. When Hargrove finally let him in, the colonel was standing behind his desk rather than sitting at it, which meant he wanted to control the visual geometry of the room. Walker didn't let it land. I want to understand the basis for the access suspension, Walker said before Hargrove could establish the frame. My range, my training operation, my candidates who are showing measurable improvement, I need to understand why that's being interrupted. The basis is my authority over base access protocols, Hargrove said, which is not subject to your review. I'm not reviewing your authority. I'm asking a professional question about a decision that's affecting my training program. That's within my rights. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Master Chief. I am being careful, Colonel. I'm being very careful. Walker kept his voice clean of anything Hargrove could grab onto. I'm also being curious, because in 19 years, I've never seen a base commander personally make a phone call about a civilian guest pass suspension. That's about 4 levels below where your attention should be. Hargrove was quiet. Which tells me, Walker continued, that this isn't about protocol. This is about something specific to Emma Carter. And if that something specific is connected to classified program history, I think we both know there are regulations about using administrative tools to manage classified exposure. You're walking a line, Walker. I'm standing on it, sir, firmly. Walker held the colonel's gaze without aggression and without yield. I'm not asking for a classified briefing. I'm asking you to tell me professionally what Emma Carter did that justifies removing her from a training environment where she is actively helping operators prepare for missions. Hargrove turned and looked out his window for a moment. When he turned back, something in his expression had shifted from anger into something colder and more calculated. There are people, Hargrove said slowly, who are supposed to stay gone. People whose existence in certain circles creates complications. Operational, political, legal complications. His voice was measured now, like he was delivering a briefing rather than having a conversation. Emma Carter is one of those people. Her presence on an active military training installation creates the kind of visibility that certain parties have a significant interest in preventing. Walker felt something cold move through him. Certain parties, he repeated. Parties above both our pay grades, Hargrove said. Leave it there. So she's not a threat, Walker said. She's an inconvenience. She's a complication. To who? Hargrove said nothing. To who? Walker repeated, and his voice stayed level, but something underneath it had changed some quality of restraint that was thin, now thinner than he wanted it to be. To the people who erased her record, to whoever decided that a woman who served in classified operations and lost everything and then built a life on the other side of that loss was still somehow a problem they needed to manage. Walker. She's teaching my operators to come home, Walker said. That is the only thing she is doing on that range. And you pulled her access because someone somewhere decided that was inconvenient. He stood very still. With respect, Colonel, that's not a reason. That's an excuse. The silence between them was long and not comfortable. Finally, Hargrove said, "The review will take as long as it takes." "Understood," Walker said. He walked out. In the hallway, he pulled out his phone and called Donovan. "It's political," he said when Donovan picked up. Her access was pulled to keep her invisible. Someone with authority above Hargrove wants her nowhere near an active installation. Donovan was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do?" Walker thought about Emma's voice. "Why does it matter to you?" The smallness of it. The honesty underneath the question that she hadn't intended to let through. "We do what she would do," Walker said. "We're patient. We don't push where pushing breaks things. And we find the right angle." "What's the right angle?" Walker walked through the exit and into the open air. He stood for a moment in the afternoon light. "Results," he said. "Hargrove can argue about access protocols and classification and administrative process all day. What he can't argue with is an operator who passed a qualification. He was failing because of what she did. He can't argue with numbers. He can't argue with lives. So we document everything." "Everything," Walker confirmed. "Every candidate she worked with, every outcome, every measurable improvement. We build a case that isn't about who she is or where she came from. It's about what she produces. And we put it in front of people who have the authority to look at it." Donovan was quiet for a beat. "That could take time." "Yes," Walker said. "It's going to take time." He looked up at the sky for a moment. The California coast spread out in front of him, the ocean somewhere beyond the buildings and the fences and the razor wire salt in the air, the way it always was. "But she came back this morning, even knowing there was a problem, even knowing this was complicated, she came back. That means something. It means everything," Walker said. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking. 3 days later, Kowalski passed his low-light qualification. Not barely, not squeaking through on a minimum acceptable score. He passed with the kind of numbers that made the evaluating officer check the calculation twice, and when the final score came through, the young operator sat on the bench outside the range building and pressed his hands flat on his knees and breathed for a long minute before he could speak. Walker sat down beside him. "She's not here, is she?" Kowalski said. Not a question. "No, but she knew." He looked at Walker. "She knew I was going to pass." Walker thought about the way Emma had said, "Keep going," before walking away. The absolute certainty in it. No doubt, no monitoring, no checking back to see how the result came out. She had said what needed to be said, and then she had trusted him to do the rest the way you only trusted someone when you already knew the answer. "Yeah," Walker said. "She knew." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. "Who is she?" Walker looked out at the range. "She's someone who paid for what she knows," he said. "The hardest way anyone pays for anything." Kowalski nodded. He seemed to understand that this was all the answer he was going to get, and he accepted it with the grace of a young man who was beginning to understand that some knowledge came with conditions. "Tell her." He stopped. "If you talk to her, tell her it worked." "She already knows," Walker said. But he told her anyway. He called the number on the driver's license he'd run 3 weeks ago, the residential listing in San Diego. The ordinary phone number belonging to the ordinary woman who didn't exist before 3 months ago. And when she answered on the third ring, her voice was careful and neutral in the way of someone who had learned to answer unknown numbers without revealing that they recognized them. "Kowalski passed," Walker said, a pause. "By how much?" she said. Walker smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Enough that the evaluator checked the math twice." Another pause. Shorter. And in it, Walker heard something that Emma Carter almost never let anyone hear. Something quiet and warm and real, buried under everything else but there. He heard it and said nothing about it because some things you protected by not naming them. "Good," she said. "He wanted me to tell you it worked." "Tell him it was already in him," she said. "I just moved something out of the way." "Emma," he kept his voice steady, "the review is going to take time, but I'm working on it. I want you to know that. I'm not," he paused, "I'm not letting this go." The silence on the line was different from her other silences. Less guarded. "I know," she said. "How?" "Because you're still calling," she said simply. And then before he could respond, she said, "Tell Donovan his rifle shoots 2 degrees left at distance. He probably knows. But tell him anyway." Walker blinked. "How do you—" "Goodbye, Walker." The line went quiet. He stood there for a moment with the phone at his side, and then he found himself doing something that surprised him. He was smiling. Not at the mystery of her, though that was real. Not at the skill, though that was real too. He was smiling because Emma Carter, who had disappeared completely once and carried the weight of that disappearance across years and oceans, and a life built from nothing, had called him Walker. Not Chief Walker, not Sir Walker, like someone who was starting very slowly to trust that the ground beneath her feet was solid. He went to find Donovan. And when he told him about the rifle, Donovan stopped completely. He looked at Walker. He looked at the rifle in his hands. Then he said very quietly, "I've known about that for 8 months. I've told 4 people in this building." He paused. "She's never touched this rifle. She's never been within 30 feet of me when I was shooting it." He looked at Walker again. Walker. How did she know? Walker thought about 5 shots at 1,100 meters, about the absolute stillness that preceded them, about the quality of attention that Emma Carter applied to every environment she entered, the way she processed and cataloged and understood everything around her, with a thoroughness that went beyond training and into something else, something that was trained into the body so deeply it operated like instinct. "She watched you," Walker said simply. "She watched the way you compensated, and she read it." Donovan was very still. "In how much time?" he said. Walker thought about it. 20 minutes, maybe." Donovan looked at his rifle for a long moment. "We need her back on this range," he said. "I know," Walker said. "Whatever it takes." "I know." Donovan looked up. "Then let's figure out what it takes." And so they did. The review took 11 days. Walker knew because he counted every one of them. He kept a legal pad on his desk and made a small mark each morning when he arrived, and Emma Carter's access was still suspended, and the range felt in some specific way. He couldn't entirely articulate, like a room where the most important piece of furniture had been removed. Not obviously broken, just off, just slightly less than it should have been. His senior instructors felt it too, though none of them said so directly. Donovan had become quieter than usual, which for Donovan was a particular kind of quiet that Walker recognized as the operational stillness of a man holding something back while he waited for conditions to change. Garrett ran tighter drills, pushed his candidates harder, and Walker understood that as Garrett's version of the same feeling, the restlessness of someone who had glimpsed a better way of doing something and was now frustrated by the return to the old way. The candidates felt it too, though they didn't have the context to understand what they were feeling. Kowalski's certification results had moved through the program, the way results always moved quietly, technically stripped of the story behind them, and the candidates who knew him had registered that something had shifted in his performance without knowing what had shifted it. There was a rumor. There was always a rumor. Walker heard 3 different versions of it over the course of the 11 days, each one further from the truth and closer to mythology than the one before. On day 12, Hargrove's aide called and said the review was complete. Walker was in front of Hargrove's desk 20 minutes later. The colonel was sitting this time, which Walker read as a different kind of move. Sitting meant the geometry had changed. Sitting meant Hargrove had made a decision and was delivering it from a position of settled authority rather than contested territory. The review found no disqualifying factors for range access, Hargrove said. His voice had the specific flatness of a man reading something he hadn't written. Walker kept his expression neutral. Then her pass is reinstated. Reinstated with conditions. Hargrove looked up. She does not interact with candidates unless directly supervised by a credentialed instructor. She does not provide instruction, correction, or technical guidance in any formal or informal capacity. She is a guest shooter, nothing more. Walker absorbed this. He thought about Emma telling Kowalski to stop arguing with himself. He thought about 2 words, shoot the target, fixing what 6 weeks of formal credentialed instruction had failed to fix. Understood, he said. Walker. Hargrove's voice dropped. I mean it this time. The conditions are not flexible. Yes, sir. He walked out. He called Emma from the parking area. She picked up on the second ring. Your access is reinstated, he said. A pause. Conditions. Some. How restrictive? Walker considered how to frame it. Officially, you're a guest shooter with no formal instruction role. And unofficially, I can't control what 2 people choose to talk about on adjacent lanes. The silence that followed had something in it that wasn't quite warmth, but was the temperature just below it. You're walking a line, Walker. I'm standing on it, he said. Same as always. He paused. "You coming back?" The answer came without hesitation this time. 6 o'clock, she said. She was there at 5:58. Walker watched her set up from the bench area and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 11 days. Donovan arrived at 6:05, looked at lane 7, and said nothing. He simply went to his own lane and began his morning routine, and the quality of his movements was lighter than it had been all week. The range was back to what it was supposed to be. For exactly 4 days, it worked. Emma shot her own work, stayed in her lane, observed the conditions Hargrove had set with a technical precision that Walker recognized as the discipline of someone who understood rules and chose to honor the letter of them even when she disagreed with the spirit. She said nothing to candidates unprompted. She kept to herself. She shot with the same absolute unhurried mastery that had pulled Walker across the range 3 weeks ago when he couldn't explain what he was watching. On the 5th day, a candidate named Torres fell apart. It happened at 9:23 in the morning. Walker noted the time because he was looking at his watch when the sound of Torres's shooting changed. The rhythm broke, the spacing between shots became uneven. The specific audio signature of a shooter losing his pattern. He looked up from his schedule review and watched Torres fire 3 rounds that should have been clean and watched all 3 of them miss the same way, pulling consistently left in a pattern that said the shooter's wrist was compensating for something his grip wasn't admitting to. The presiding instructor, a SEAL named Richter, walked to Torres' lane and delivered 3 corrections. Torres adjusted and fired again, still pulling left. Richter corrected again, still left. Walker could see the young operator's jaw getting tighter with each shot, the specific tension of someone who was hearing the technical guidance and could not get his body to execute it, the gap between knowing and doing opening wider with every trigger pull. It was not a wrist problem. Walker knew that. He suspected Richter knew it too, somewhere under the technical vocabulary. Wrist was a symptom. The problem was something Torres was holding in his chest that was communicating itself down his arm and into his hands and out through the rifle, and no grip correction in the world was going to fix it, because you couldn't fix a grip problem that wasn't actually a grip problem. He looked at lane 7. Emma was watching Torres. She had stopped her own shooting. Her rifle was still, and her attention was on the young candidate in the way that Walker had learned to recognize, that quality of absolute unhurried focus that she applied to something when she had already understood it and was waiting to see whether anyone else was going to understand it first. Richter delivered a 4th correction. Torres missed again. Walker watched Emma's hand move toward her rifle case, then stop. The conditions, Hargrove's conditions. No instruction, no correction, no formal or informal technical guidance. She was thinking about them. He could see her thinking about them, the specific tension of someone holding themselves back from something every instinct they had was telling them to do. Torres fired again, missed badly, and then he did something that Walker had seen before and always recognized as the moment a session turned from difficult to damaged. He slammed his palm flat on the bench beside his rifle, not hard enough to attract official attention, hard enough to communicate everything about what was happening inside him. Richter stepped back slightly, looked at his clipboard. The technical vocabulary had run out. Walker stood up. He walked to Emma's lane. He leaned down and said very quietly, directly into the operational space where microphones didn't reach, "Richter needs a consultant." Emma looked at him. "Officially," Walker said, "you're still a guest shooter. Officially, this conversation isn't happening." He held her gaze. But Richter just hit the end of his toolkit, and that kid is about to make a mistake in his own head that's going to take months to fix if someone doesn't interrupt it in the next 60 seconds. Emma was already moving. She walked to Richter's position and said something to him that Walker couldn't hear from where he was standing. Richter looked at her. His expression was the standard defensive evaluation of a credentialed professional, confronted with an uncredentialed suggestion, and it lasted about 3 seconds before something in what she was saying shifted his expression into something different. He stepped back. Emma crouched beside Torres' position. Not behind him, beside him at eye level, the physical positioning of someone who was there to talk rather than evaluate. Walker watched Torres' shoulders change. He couldn't hear what she said. He would never know exactly what she said because when he asked Torres about it later, the young candidate had difficulty articulating it. Said she hadn't talked about shooting at all. Said she had asked him something about his hands and then asked him something about what he was afraid he was going to lose, and that whatever he said in response was the thing that changed the conversation. What Walker saw was Torres fire his next round center mass. Then the round after that. Then four more in a group so clean that Richter literally took a step forward to look at the display more closely because what he was seeing didn't match what he had been watching for the previous 20 minutes. Torres stood up slowly from his position and turned to look at Emma. She was already straightening, already creating the physical distance that the conditions required already, in the process of becoming just a guest shooter in the adjacent lane again. "Wait," Torres said. His voice was young and raw and completely without performance. How did you already knew how to do it," Emma said. "Isham, you just needed someone to tell you that you were allowed to." She walked back to her lane. The range continued around her. Walker sat back down on the bench. Richter was looking at his clipboard, looking at Torres, looking at the display, and then he looked across the range at Walker with an expression that asked a question Walker didn't have a clean answer for. He spread his hands slightly. That was all. Richter nodded once, turned back to his candidate. It lasted 4 more days before Hargrove found out. Walker wasn't sure how. He had his theories, someone on the range with the wrong kind of loyalty or the right kind of ambition, or simply the uncomplicated impulse to report what they had seen because the rules said they should. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that on a Tuesday morning, 16 days after Emma's access had been reinstated, Walker's phone rang at 7:45, and it was Hargrove's aide telling him the colonel wanted him in his office immediately. Not at his convenience, immediately. Walker told his senior instructor to hold the morning drills and drove to the admin building. Hargrove was standing again. "She's out," he said before Walker was fully through the door. "Permanently. No review, no appeal, no conditions. Her pass is revoked as of this morning." Walker stopped, kept his voice completely level. "On what grounds?" "Violation of the conditions of her reinstatement. She was observed providing instruction to a candidate in an active training context. That violates the explicit terms." "She had a conversation," Walker said, "a private conversation on an adjacent lane. A private conversation that resulted in a measurable change in the candidate's performance," Hargrove said sharply. "Which means it was instruction, which means she violated the conditions." Walker looked at Hargrove for a long moment. Something had changed in the colonel's manner over the past weeks. The cold calculation of their first confrontation had been replaced by something that ran hotter and less controlled, and Walker recognized that as the quality of a man who was being pressured from above and transferring the pressure downward because that was all he had the authority to do. "Colonels," Walker said carefully, "I want to understand something. Not the policy question, the real question." He held Hargrove's gaze. "Who is pushing this? Because what's happening on my range doesn't warrant this level of personal attention from you. Someone is leaning on you to keep Emma Carter away from this installation, and I want to know who, and I want to know why." Hargrove's expression shifted. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. Walker didn't miss it. "That is not a conversation we're going to have," Hargrove said. "Then I need to take this to someone who will have it," Walker said, "because I'm not going to watch a woman who served this country get managed out of a training environment where she is saving lives because someone above your pay grade is uncomfortable with her visibility. I'm not going to do that quietly." "Walker, I have documentation," Walker said. "Kowalski's certification numbers, Torres's session results, every candidate she interacted with, and every measurable outcome from those interactions. I have Donovan's written statement about what he observed. I have Richter's after-action notes." He paused. "I was not supposed to have those things technically, but I have them, and I'm prepared to put them in front of whoever needs to see them." The silence in the room was the loudest kind. Hargrove looked at him for a long time. "You're going to get yourself in front of a very bad situation," the colonel said finally. "Not a threat, an assessment." "Yes, sir," Walker said. "Probably." He didn't move. "I'm okay with that." He left the office. He drove back to the range. He sat in the parking area for a few minutes before going in, and he called Emma from the car. She picked up immediately. "I know," she said before he could speak. He went still. "You know already. I had a feeling it was coming." Her voice was calm, the kind of calm that lived on the other side of a long time of accepting things. "It's okay." "It's not okay," Walker said, and his voice came out harder than he intended. He softened it. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "All right. Is there someone specific, a name, a program, a chain of command, that has an active interest in keeping you out of circulation, not a general classification concern. Someone specific. The pause was long enough that he almost spoke again. Yes, she said. Will you tell me who? Another pause. If I tell you, she said slowly, you're going to go after them. And going after them is going to cost you things you haven't budgeted for. That's my problem to manage, Walker said. Walker, Emma. He kept his voice steady. You have been managing this alone for long enough. Let me help. That's all I'm asking. The silence on the line was different from her other silences. This one had texture to it, the texture of someone working through something internal that they hadn't let anyone else near in a very long time. His name is Caldwell, she said finally. Deputy Director Special Programs. He was the senior official who authorized the operation that... She stopped. The operation that went wrong, the one that cost us another stop, shorter. He's been monitoring my location for 3 years. Not actively, passively, making sure I stay gone. Walker was very still. He's afraid of exposure, she said. Not classified program exposure, personal exposure. The decisions that were made that night, the ones that got people killed, those were his decisions. And I was there. I know what those decisions were. Walker felt the shape of it come together. All of it. The erased records, the buried access, the immediate personal response when she appeared on a military installation. The pressure on Hargrove that was making the colonel act outside his normal operational behavior. He doesn't want you visible, Walker said slowly, because visible means discoverable. Yes. And discoverable means accountable. Yes. Walker sat for a long moment in the parking area of the base where he had served for a decade, looking at the building where his candidates were running drills without Emma Carter on the range, and without the thing she carried that made those drills better, and he felt something settle in him that was the opposite of fear. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, I understand what we're dealing with. He paused. I need you to send me something. Anything you're comfortable sending. Anything that establishes what you know and when you knew it. I'm not building a legal case, I'm building a position. Something that tells Caldwell's people that this is no longer a situation they can manage quietly. Emma was very quiet. Emma, he said, I'm not asking you to fight this battle. I'm asking you to let me fight it. There's a difference. You don't know what you're walking into, she said. No, he agreed, but I know what I'm walking away from if I don't. And I know what those kids on my range are walking away from. He paused. 23 candidates in the next window. Some of them are going to go to places that are going to try to kill them. And some of the things they don't know yet, the things you know that nobody else on this base knows how to teach, some of those things are going to be the difference between coming home and not coming home. The silence stretched. Walker, she said. Yeah. Why are you doing this? Her voice was quiet, genuinely asking the same question she had asked before in the same small, honest register. And this time it carried even more weight because now she knew more about what the answer was going to cost him. He thought about it for a real moment, not the rehearsed version of the answer, the actual one. Because the right person for the job showed up, he said, and the wrong people are trying to send her home. And I've spent 19 years watching the wrong people make that call and watching what it case. I'm tired of watching. Emma said nothing, but he heard something on the line, something quiet, something that might have been exhaled breath or might have been something else that she wouldn't have let him hear if she'd been prepared for the moment. I'll send you something tonight, she said. She did. It arrived at 11:47 p.m. forwarded from a secure email address. Walker didn't recognize to a personal account he had used twice in his career for things that required personal rather than official channels. The attachment was a single document, 12 pages, and Walker sat at his kitchen table and read it in the kind of silence that falls when you're holding something that has weight beyond its physical form. It was not a formal report. It was not written in the clipped technical language of official after-action documentation. It was written in the plain language of someone who had been in a specific place on a specific night and had watched specific decisions get made, and who had committed those decisions to paper years later with the careful precision of someone who understood that memory was perishable and truth needed to be nailed down before it faded. The operation had been real. The decision that had ended it, the call to extract early, to pull back before the secondary team was cleared to prioritize the classified asset over the people still in the field that had been Caldwell's call, and the people who hadn't made it out had been Emma Carter's people. Walker set the document down on the table. He sat with it for a long time. I thought about her gray hoodie and her quiet, and the way she moved through space like someone who had learned that existing too loudly got people killed. He thought about the specific weight he had recognized in her eyes the first time they spoke, the old pain that she had controlled so completely that most people would never have known it was there. I thought about a woman who had survived something unsurvivable, been erased for her trouble, rebuilt herself into a version of a life, and then walked onto his range one October morning and started giving away the most valuable thing she had left, what she knew to young operators she would never see again, because somewhere underneath all the survival and the silence and the weight, she couldn't stop. She couldn't stop teaching because teaching was the only way she had left to protect them, the kids who reminded her of the ones she hadn't been able to save. Walker closed the document. He didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, he made 3 calls before 6 a.m. The first was to a retired admiral he had served under 12 years earlier, a man who had spent the last 4 years of his career watching classification get weaponized against the people it was supposed to protect, and who had left the service with a specific kind of anger that he applied in retirement to specific kinds of situations. The second call was to a JAG officer he trusted. The third call was to Donovan. "I need you to write down everything," Walker told Donovan. "Everything you observed, every interaction, every result, every conversation you were part of. I need it in writing, clean and factual, no interpretation. Just what you saw." Donovan was quiet for a beat. "Are we going official with this?" "We're going strategic with it," Walker said, "which might become official, but right now it's strategic." "How much trouble is this going to be?" Walker thought about Caldwell, about 12 pages, about a woman who had been carrying someone else's crime for 3 years without anyone to carry it with her. "Enough," he said. "Are you in?" Donovan didn't hesitate. "What do you need first?" Garrett came in an hour later, and Walker didn't even have to ask. Garrett had apparently arrived at his own version of the same decision independently, because he walked into the range office with a folder of written notes already compiled, organized by date and candidate, every interaction documented, with the precision of a man who had served long enough to know that paper trails were either weapons or shields, depending on who held them. "I figured we were going to need these," Garrett said simply, setting the folder on Walker's desk. Walker looked at the folder, looked at Garrett. "You were expecting this?" "I've been expecting this since Hargrove made that first call," Garrett said. "When a colonel personally calls about a guest range pass, something is wrong. I started documenting the day after." He paused. "I have 17 candidate sessions, 12 with observable outcome improvements directly correlated to interaction with Carter. The other 5 she didn't work with, and I documented those 2 as controls." Walker stared at him. "You documented controls." "Somebody had to," Garrett said. Walker picked up his folder. It was, he thought, the most useful thing anyone had done in weeks. By midday, he had statements from Donovan Garrett Richter and 2 other instructors who had observed Emma's work on the range and were willing to put their names on what they had seen. He had Kowalski's certification data with the full before and after documentation. He had Torres's session records. He had 6 other candidate outcomes, each one a thread in the same pattern. And he had Emma's 12 pages. He called the retired admiral at noon. "I have a situation," he said. "You have several situations from what I can tell," the admiral said. His voice was the voice of a man who had navigated enough institutional complexity to find it almost amusing rather than exhausting. "Tell me the most important one," Walker told him. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Caldwell," the admiral said. "You know him." "I know of him. I know the program. I know the operation." A pause. "I knew some of the people." The Walker was very still. "Then you know what Emma Carter is." "I know what she was," the admiral said. "I didn't know she was still alive." Another pause, longer and heavier. "I was told she wasn't." The silence between them carried everything it needed to carry. "She's alive," Walker said. "She's been alive. And she's been on my range for 3 months teaching my operators things that are going to bring them home from deployments that should have gone the other way. And Caldwell is trying to shut that down. Caldwell has been trying to manage her back into invisibility since she surfaced. He's using Hargrove as the instrument." The admiral was quiet for a long moment. "Send me the documentation," he said finally. "All of it. All of it." Walker sent it at 12:47 p.m. At 2:30, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it. Master Chief Walker. The voice was female, measured with the particular cadence of someone who had spent a long time in institutional authority. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I'm looking at the documentation you sent to Admiral Ferris 30 minutes ago, and I'd like to have a conversation. Walker said nothing for a beat. That was fast. The Admiral has efficient channels, the woman said, and the situation you've described has been on a particular watch list for some time, for reasons that are not immediately relevant, but that you may find interesting. What watch list? A program review that was initiated 14 months ago, she said, examining decision-making quality in certain Tier 1 operations over a specific period. Examining specifically the question of whether certain decisions prioritize asset protection over personnel welfare in ways that violated standing protocols. A pause. Caldwell's program falls within the review window. Walker understood what he was being told. He had walked into a larger story than he knew. Emma Carter was not the only thread. She was the most visible one, the one that had walked onto his range in a faded gray hoodie and made herself impossible to ignore. But the pattern behind her, the decisions that had been made, the people who had been lost, the records that had been buried, that pattern was already being pulled. He had simply given someone the thread they needed to pull it faster. What happens now, he said. Now, the woman said carefully. We would like to speak with Emma Carter, formally, voluntarily, with full legal protection in place before the conversation begins. Another pause. That protection is something we can arrange. What we cannot arrange is her willingness. That would need to come from you. Walker thought about Emma's voice. You're going to get yourself in front of a very bad situation. He thought about the weight in her eyes and the 12 pages she had sent at midnight and the absolute trust it had taken for her to send them. I'll talk to her, he said. We'd appreciate that. But I need something first, Walker said, before I ask her to do anything else, before I ask her to take one more risk. What do you need? Her range access reinstated, Walker said. Full access, no conditions, no Hargrove, no review, no restrictions. Today. A pause. That's a narrow request, the woman said. It's the only one I'm making right now. Another pause. Give me an hour, she said. It took 40 minutes. At 4:10 p.m., Walker's email received a formal notification from base administration that Emma Carter's guest range access had been reinstated in full effective immediately, with a note attached that read, access previously suspended in administrative error. Administrative error. Walker stared at those two words for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Emma. She answered on the first ring. Check your email, he said. A pause, then the sound of something in the background, keys on a keyboard maybe. The sound of someone at a desk in a quiet house in San Diego looking at a notification they had not expected. Walker, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Yeah. How did you? I pulled a thread, he said, and it turned out to be attached to something bigger than both of us. He paused. There are people who want to talk to you, formally, with protections in place about the operation, about Caldwell, about everything. The silence was long. I know, she said finally. He went still. You know, I've known something was moving for about 6 months, she said. I didn't know from which direction or whether it would reach me, for she stopped, started again. I wasn't sure anyone was going to pull the thread. You could have pulled it yourself, Walker said. No, she said, and her voice carried something in it that was not bitterness, but was adjacent to it. I could not have pulled it myself. The only person who can pull a thread like that is someone inside the building. Someone they can't erase. A pause. Someone like you. Walker thought about that. I thought about Emma walking onto his range 3 months ago, with a rifle and a gray hoodie and a guest pass issued through a general administrative authorization with no unit and no sponsor. No unit and no sponsor. He thought about the timing of it 3 months after a program review had been quietly initiated, 3 months after a thread had started being pulled somewhere above both their clearance levels. He thought about whether it was a coincidence. I thought about Emma Carter, who had survived things that should have killed her and built a life from nothing, and then walked onto the range nearest to where the relevant people were and started making herself impossible to ignore. He thought about those 5 shots. He thought about whether any of it was an accident. Emma, he said slowly. Yes. Did you know, he said, when you walked onto that range the first time? Did you know what was in motion? The pause was the longest one yet. I knew something needed to be set in motion, she said carefully. I didn't know if it would work. Another pause. I needed to be somewhere that mattered, somewhere the right people would notice. A beat. You noticed. Walker sat with that for a long moment. She had come to his range not just for somewhere familiar. She had come because she had decided quietly and alone, and without telling anyone, that 3 years of being gone was enough, that the people who had erased her did not get to keep her erased, that the operators she watched moving through their drills every morning deserved what she knew, and that the only way to be visible to the right people was to be so undeniably present that the wrong ones couldn't manage her back into the shadows without someone seeing them do it. She had handed herself to Walker the way Donovan had handed her the rifle, trusting him to step back, trusting him to let her shoot. Your turn, he said softly. She was very quiet for a moment. My turn, she agreed. And somewhere in the 45 days that followed, everything began to change. The formal conversation happened on a Wednesday. Walker drove Emma to the meeting himself. She had asked him to, which surprised him because Emma Carter was not someone who asked for things easily. She had asked with the same careful economy she applied to everything, a single text message at 7 in the morning that said simply, "Can you drive?" And Walker had texted back 6:45, and that was the entire negotiation. She was waiting outside her building when he pulled up. She was wearing the gray hoodie again, which Walker had come to understand was not a choice about clothing, but a choice about armor. She carried a single folder, nothing else, and she got into the passenger seat with the composed movement of someone who had made peace with a decision before they made it and was no longer in the process of second-guessing. She said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Walker didn't push it. He drove and let the silence be what it was, which was not uncomfortable, but was heavy with the weight of everything that had been building for 3 months, everything that was about to be named in a formal setting and given official shape for the first time. Are you scared? He asked finally, not to break the silence, because he genuinely wanted to know. Emma looked out the passenger window. No, she said. Then after a pause, that's probably the first true thing I've said in 3 years. Walker nodded. I'm tired, she said, not complaining, just naming it. I have been tired for a very long time, and I think today might be the first day I don't have to be. Walker let that sit for a moment. Whatever happens in there, he said, whatever they ask and whatever you decide to tell them, you were right to come back. You were right to be on that range. Nothing that happens today changes what you've already done. Emma looked at him. Kowalski. Kowalski, he confirmed. Torres. Torres, Webb, every one of them. He kept his eyes on the road. They carry what you gave them. That doesn't go away regardless of what happens with Caldwell or the review or any of it. She looked back out the window, and Walker, who had spent 19 years learning to read people in high-pressure situations, saw something change in her face. Something that had been braced, released fractionally like a cable under tension, finally finding half an inch of slack. The meeting lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes. Walker waited outside. He read a training manual he had already read twice and didn't retain a word of it, and he drank 3 cups of bad coffee from a machine in the hallway. And at 2 points, he stood up and walked the length of the corridor and back just to have something physical to do with the waiting. At 12:43, the door opened. Emma came out first. She looked the same as she had going in, which Walker had not entirely expected. The same composed exterior, the same controlled presentation. But something behind it had shifted. The specific quality of exhaustion he had always seen in her, the old deep kind that came from carrying something heavy alone, was different now. Not gone, but different, shared maybe. Set down in a room with other people and left there. The woman who had called Walker the previous afternoon came out behind Emma. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the particular bearing of someone who had operated at the level where decisions had real consequences for a long time. She looked at Walker and said, "Master Chief," with the brevity of someone who respected time. "Ma'am," he said. "We're going to need her again in 10 days, the woman said. "There's a panel, full review board, closed session." She looked at Emma. "You'll have counsel, full protection. The parameters we discussed are binding." Emma nodded. The woman looked back at Walker. Thank you for the documentation. It was the piece we were missing. A pause. And for the record, what you did here, walking into Hargrove's office, making those calls, that took something. It took less than it should have, Walker said. The woman almost smiled. That's what people always say afterward. She extended her hand. Walker shook it. 10 days, she said to Emma, and then she walked back through the door. Walker looked at Emma. You okay, he said. She thought about it for a genuine moment, the way she thought about everything with full attention, without rush. I told them everything, she said. The whole operation, the sequence of decisions, the timeline, what Caldwell ordered, and when he ordered it, and what it cost. She paused. I've been holding that for 3 years, holding it completely alone. And I sat in that room and I said every word of it out loud and she stopped. It didn't kill me. No, Walker said. No, I thought it might, she said quietly. That's the honest truth. I thought saying it out loud might be the thing that finally, she stopped again. Then it didn't. No, he said again. They walked to the car. Halfway across the parking area, Emma said, I want to go to the range. Walker looked at his watch. It was 1:15 in the afternoon. Now, she said. He drove her to the range. She shot for 2 hours. Walker sat on the bench and watched and said nothing and understood that this was necessary in the way that some things are necessary, not optional, not strategic, just true. She needed the rifle in her hands and the distance and the problem and the absolute present tense focus of sending rounds downrange with precision. She needed to be in the one place in the world where the only thing that existed was the target and the distance and the calculation and her own capability, which no one could revoke and no panel could review and no deputy director could bury. She shot until the lights started going long, and then she broke down her equipment with the same methodical care she always used, and she looked at Walker with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Tomorrow, she said, bring me your hardest case. Walker raised an eyebrow. My hardest case. The candidate you've been most worried about, the one your instructors have been losing sleep over. She zipped her case. Bring them to lane 7 at 6 a.m. Walker looked at her for a moment. Access is fully reinstated. No conditions. I know. She stood. That's why I'm asking. His hardest case was a young man named Delgado, 26 years old Army Ranger Cross assigned to a joint training evolution with the intent of integrating long-range precision skills into a Ranger-qualified shooter who had the physical and tactical foundation but had never been formally trained in the patience that long-range shooting required. Delgado was fast, aggressive, tactically instinctive in the way Rangers were trained to be, qualities that were enormous assets in most operational contexts and a specific liability when the job required stillness instead of action. His instructors had been working him for 3 weeks. The results were inconsistent in the specific way of a talented person fighting their own nature, flashes of extraordinary capability, followed by collapses that erased them. He could shoot brilliantly for 20 minutes and then completely unravel when the sequence demanded sustained patience rather than reactive precision. Walker told him to be at lane 7 at 6 a.m. and didn't tell him why. Delgado showed up at 5:55, which was Ranger punctuality, and found Emma Carter already set up and running a cold bore sequence at 1,000 meters. He looked at her. He looked at Walker. He looked back at her. Who's this? He said, not impolitely. Someone you're going to learn something from, Walker said, if you're smart enough to let her teach you. Delgado watched Emma fire 3 rounds. The grouping on the display made him go very still. Who is she? He said, quieter this time. Someone who knows what your problem is already, Walker said. She's known since you walked in the gate. Delgado looked at him. She's been watching me for 2 minutes. That's all it takes her, Walker said. Emma turned from her lane. She looked at Delgado with the direct, unhurried attention that Walker had seen her apply to every candidate she'd ever worked with. The attention that saw through the surface presentation to whatever was happening underneath it. You're fighting the weight, she said. Every time the pace drops below what your body considers acceptable, you compensate. You push the trigger instead of letting it go. And you know you're doing it, which makes it worse because then you're fighting the push and fighting the awareness of the push simultaneously, and by the time you're back in the moment, you've missed the window. Delgado stared at her. He stopped. That's exactly what's happening, Walker said. How does she? Delgado stopped again. He looked at Emma. How did you know that from watching me walk in? The way you move, Emma said simply. You move like someone who's always a half second ahead of themselves. That's a strength in most situations. In this one, it's the entire problem. She picked up her own rifle and offered it to him. Not aggressively, just extended it the way you hand something to someone when you're certain they can handle it. Come here. He came. What happened over the next 3 hours was the thing that Walker would struggle to explain to people who hadn't been there, because the technical description of it in an experienced shooter, coaching a less experienced one through sustained patience drills missed everything that actually made it what it was. Emma didn't teach Delgado how to slow down. She showed him by doing it beside him what slowing down actually felt like from the inside. She ran sequences next to him and narrated her own internal process in real time, not the technical process, not the mechanics, but the mental experience of it. What she was feeling, what she was ignoring, what she was letting pass through her without reacting to it. I can feel my heartbeat right now, she said at one point, completely level, 2 seconds before a shot. I'm not going to try to slow it. I'm going to let it be there and shoot between beats, not against them, between them. She fired. Perfect impact. Delgado watched. Try it, she said. Not the technique, the feeling. Find the space between. He fired. Not perfect, but better. Meaningfully better. Again, she said. He fired again. Better still. By 9, and Delgado was shooting in a pattern that his instructors had not seen from him in 3 weeks of daily work. By 10, he was holding groups that were, by any objective measurement, genuinely exceptional for his training level. By 11, he was shooting with a quality of stillness that Walker recognized as something that couldn't be faked, something that had actually changed in the young man, some internal negotiation that he had completed while Emma talked him through it. At 11:30, Delgado set down his rifle and looked at Emma Carter with the expression of someone who has just had a fundamental thing rearranged. What just happened, he said, not rhetorically, actually asking. You stopped fighting yourself, Emma said. You let the pace be the pace instead of trying to change it. She looked at him steadily. Your instincts are good. You don't need to override them. You need to trust that they work at this speed too, not just the fast speed. Delgado was quiet for a moment. I've been in this program 3 weeks. I know. Every instructor I've had has been working on this same thing. I know that too. And you fixed it in a morning. Emma looked at him for a moment. I didn't fix anything, she said. You fixed it. I just told you where to look. She held his gaze. The difference between what I can tell you and what your instructors have been telling you isn't the information. It's the source. They're telling you from the outside. I'm telling you from the inside. She paused. I had this exact problem once, in a different context, with consequences that were, she stopped, significant. Delgado was very still. What happened, he said. Emma held his gaze for a moment, and Walker, watching from the bench, saw her make a decision. Saw the precise moment she chose to cross a line she had been holding very carefully, the line between the impersonal instruction of a skilled practitioner and the personal testimony of someone who had lived the thing they were teaching. I didn't trust the weight, she said. I pushed one time in a situation where the weight was the only correct answer. And what I did instead cost people I cared about everything. Her voice was completely level. So when I tell you to trust the space between, I'm not giving you a technique. I'm giving you what I paid for. The range was very quiet. Delgado nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone receiving something real. Thank you, he said. Emma turned back to her lane without responding, but Walker saw her hands just for a second, and they were not entirely steady, and he understood what that cost her, and he said nothing about it because some things you honored by letting them be private. 3 days later, Donovan came to find Walker in the range office. He closed the door behind him, which meant it was serious. I got a call this morning, Donovan said, from Reyes. Walker went still. Captain Marcus Reyes was the commanding officer of a SEAL platoon currently deployed in a region Walker couldn't name, in a room without a SCIF certification. He and Donovan had served together 6 years earlier. What kind of call? The kind you make when you're losing people and you don't understand why. Donovan sat down across from Walker. His voice was controlled, but Walker could hear what was underneath it, the specific tension of a man who has received information about people he knew and cared about. 3 operators down in the past 2 weeks. Not enemy contact. Positioning errors. Judgment calls that went wrong in ways that shouldn't have gone wrong. He paused. Reyes says the problem is pattern recognition at distance. The team's sniper element is missing indicators that should be stopping them before engagement, and by the time they see what they missed, it's too late. Walker felt the words land. Pattern recognition at distance. Reading an environment before committing. Knowing what was wrong from 30 feet away with 2 minutes of observation. He looked at Donovan. Donovan looked back at him. She can't go forward, Walker said. It was not a question. It was a statement of the obvious reality. Emma's formal review process was active. Her legal situation was unresolved. Her visibility was precisely the kind of visibility that made deploying her to a forward operational environment impossible. That's not even a conversation we can have right now. I know, Donovan said. I'm not suggesting she goes anywhere. He leaned forward. But Walker, what she knows. The pattern recognition, the environmental reading, the way she identifies what's wrong before anyone else has processed it, that's not something she invented. It's something she was taught. It's a methodology. Walker heard what Donovan was saying. Can it be written down? Walker said slowly. That's what I'm asking her, Donovan said. Whether she can codify it, whether she can take what she does intuitively and break it down into something teachable by someone who isn't her. Walker thought about it. Have you talked to her? Not yet. Donovan held his gaze. I wanted to talk to you first, because asking her to do that, to take what she's been carrying inside herself for years and put it on paper is a significant ask. And I didn't want to do it without you knowing. Walker nodded slowly. He thought about Emma's hands, the slight unsteadiness after she told Delgado about the cost of not trusting the weight, the first crack in the controlled exterior that she had maintained for 3 months. The weight of what she was carrying beginning very slowly to be redistributable. I'll talk to her, Walker said. He found her at the range that afternoon, running her usual late session work. He waited until she had completed the sequence she was on, and then he walked over and sat on the bench beside her, swaying, rather than standing, which was a deliberate choice. Sitting said, "This is a conversation, not a briefing." She looked at him, read his expression. What happened? Reyes, he said. Donovan's contact forward. 3 operators down in 2 weeks. Pattern recognition failures. Emma's face didn't change, but her hands resting on the bench beside her rifle went very still. What do you need? She said. Nothing that puts you in any position you're not already in, Walker said carefully. The review is active. You're not deploying anywhere. That's not what I'm asking. He paused. What I'm asking is whether you can write it down. The methodology, the way you read environments, the way you identify indicators that others miss, the specific framework that lets you look at a shooter for 2 minutes and know exactly what's wrong. Whether you can put it in a form that someone else can teach. Emma was quiet for a long time. It's not a technique, she said finally. It's not a checklist. I know. It's a way of paying attention. It took me years to build it, and it wasn't built in a classroom. I know that too, Walker said. I'm not asking for a classroom manual. I'm asking for whatever you can give, whatever form it can take, because there are operators right now who are missing things they shouldn't be missing, and the people who should be teaching them to see don't know how to teach it. Emma looked at him. 3 operators, she said, in 2 weeks. She looked out at the range, at the targets, at the distance between the firing line and where the rounds were supposed to go, and all the variables in between that could be read or missed. I'll try, she said. I don't know what it'll look like. I don't know if it'll work for someone who isn't. She stopped. Who doesn't have the same background. Whatever you can give, Walker said. She started writing that night. Walker knew because she called him at 11 p.m. not to tell him anything, just to ask a clarifying question about the operational context of the pattern recognition failures Reyes had described. He answered the question. She said thank you and hung up. He lay in bed afterward and stared at the ceiling for a while and thought about what it meant that Emma Carter, who had spent 3 years not writing anything down about the things she carried, was sitting alone in a house in San Diego at 11 p.m., trying to put it into words for the benefit of people she would never meet. She called again at 12:40. How technical do they need it to be? She asked. Plain language, Walker said immediately. If it sounds like a doctrine document, it won't be used. It needs to sound like a person talking. A pause. Okay, she said. Emma. Yeah. Thank you, he said. The silence that followed was the kind that meant something had been received rather than deflected. Go to sleep, Walker, she said, and hung up. The document arrived in his email at 4:17 a.m., 23 pages. And Walker, who had slept badly and was already awake when his phone lit up, sat at his kitchen table in the pre-dawn dark and read every word. It was extraordinary. Not because it was technically complex, it wasn't deliberately. She had written it the way she talked, plain and direct and without performance, with the same quality of unhurried precision she applied to everything. But what it contained was a complete framework for a way of seeing that Walker had only ever encountered in people who had spent years in operational environments that forced them to develop it or die. She had broken down something he had always considered innate, the ability of the rarest operators to read what was wrong before anything was visibly wrong into a set of learnable habits of attention. Not checklist items, not procedures, habits, patterns of awareness, the specific quality of active stillness that distinguished the people who survived from the people who didn't. He read it twice. Then he called Donovan at 6 a.m. Come to my office, he said, before the range opens. Donovan read it in Walker's office while Walker watched his face. Donovan was not a man whose expressions told you much, but Walker knew him well enough to read the subtle tells, the slight forward tilt when something engaged him completely, the stillness of his eyes when he was processing rather than reading the single exhale through the nose when he reached something that hit something real. He finished and set the document on the desk. This needs to go to Reyes, he said. Yes, Walker said. Today, yes. And it needs to go to the Training Command Curriculum Committee, Donovan said. Because this is not a field fix for one platoon. He stopped, looked at the document, looked at Walker. Walker, this is the thing that's been missing from the advanced sniper curriculum for 20 years. The thing that every instructor knows exists as a quality in certain operators, and nobody has ever been able to teach because nobody has ever been able to describe it. Walker nodded slowly. She described it. She described it completely. Donovan picked up the document again, looked at the first page. 23 pages in one night. 3 years of carrying it, Walker said, and one night to write it down. Donovan was quiet for a moment. She needs to know, he said, that this is going to change things. Operationally, this goes into training, it gets implemented, it gets used in the field. People are going to come home who wouldn't have come home. That's not metaphor. That's a measurable operational outcome. She knows, Walker said. Does she know we're going to submit it formally? I'm going to tell her this morning. Walker called her from the range parking area at 6:30 before she arrived. She picked up in the second ring. I read it, he said, and it's going to Reyes today, and it's going to the Training Command Curriculum Committee this week. And Emma, he paused, it's going to be in the program, formally, taught to every advanced sniper candidate going through the pipeline. The silence was long. Without my name on it, she said, not a question. Walker hesitated. This was the thing he had thought about since 4 a.m., the thing that had no clean answer. Her formal review was still active. Her identity was still technically subject to classification constraints that were being worked through channels that moved at their own pace regardless of what Walker wanted. For now, he said, the attribution question is part of what's being worked, but the content, he stopped. The content is yours. That doesn't change regardless of whose name is on it. I don't care about the name, she said. I know. I care that it gets used. Her voice was very quiet. I care that someone out there, she stopped. He could hear her breathing, that someone out there comes home because of it. That's all. They will, Walker said. I can promise you that. She arrived at the range at 6:48. She set up in lane 7 the way she always did. She ran her first sequence with the unhurried precision that Walker had stopped being surprised by and had simply accepted as the baseline of what Emma Carter was. She shot at 1,000 meters in a shifting wind and hit the target 5 times in 4 minutes, and then turned to find Walker standing at his usual position on the bench. He was smiling. She looked at him for a moment. What? Nothing, he said. Just, he stopped, tried to find the right words and realized there weren't any. I'm glad you came back the first time when you had every reason not to. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that she didn't lock down as quickly as she usually would have. Something genuine. So am I, she said. She turned back to her rifle. The range filled up around her. Candidates arrived and took their lanes in the morning noise built into the familiar rhythm of a training day. Instructors ran their drills. The air smelled of gunpowder and cold metal and the faint salt edge of the Pacific. Normal, exactly as it should be. At 8:47, a candidate named Harris came to the bench near Walker and stood there for a moment watching Emma shoot. "Chief Walker," Harris said. "Who is she?" Walker looked at Harris, young face, good eyes, the particular alertness of someone who had the instincts for this work and was still building the knowledge to go with them. The kind of face Walker had been looking at for 19 years. "She's your instructor," Walker said. Harris looked back at Emma. "Is she military?" Walker thought about 23 pages written between midnight and 4 a.m. He thought about Kowalski and Torres and Delgado, and 3 operators forward who would read a document in the next 24 hours that might save their lives. He thought about a woman who had been erased and rebuilt herself and then walked back into the one place that mattered because she couldn't stop giving the most expensive thing she owned. "She's the most important person on this range," Walker said. "And if you pay close attention to everything she does and everything she says, you're going to come home from places that should have killed you." Harris looked at him. Then he looked back at Emma. "Okay," he said, quietly, simply. He went to get his equipment. Walker watched him go. Donovan appeared at his shoulder a moment later, the way Donovan always appeared quietly without announcement. "Rhea's acknowledged receipt," Donovan said. "He read the first 6 pages on his phone before I finished the call." "Good," Walker said. He said, Donovan paused. He said, "It reads like it was written by someone who's been in the dark and knows exactly how dark it gets." Walker looked at lane 7. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it is." They stood together in the morning noise of the range, and Walker thought about the 45 days since Emma had said my turn, and everything that had moved in those 45 days and everything that was still moving. The review, the panel, the document now traveling forward to a platoon that needed it, the curriculum committee that would receive it this week, the candidates on this range who would be different operators because of a woman in a gray hoodie who had chosen after 3 years of being gone to be impossible to ignore. I thought about the 5 shots she had fired when Donovan handed her the rifle. Not simply accurate, perfect. The lesson was never about the rifle. He understood that now in a way he hadn't when it started. He had thought the lesson was about skill, about what she could do, about the specific, rare, irreplaceable things she carried in her hands and her eyes and the quiet economy of her presence. But that wasn't the lesson. The lesson was what happened when one person trusted another person enough to hand over the most important thing they had and step back. The lesson was in the stepping back, in the willingness to clear the space and let someone else shoot. Donovan had done it for Emma. Emma had done it for every operator she had worked with since. And now Emma's knowledge, the hardest earned thing she owned, was traveling forward to operators she would never meet in places she would never go, doing work she would never see. She had handed it over and stepped back. Walker looked at lane 7. Emma was running another sequence. Still precise, unhurried. 5 rounds downrange with the absolute presence of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing in the only way they knew how to do it. He didn't need to call her name. He didn't need to say anything. He just stood there and watched, and he understood that some things you honored by witnessing them, and that this was one of those things. The range continued around her. The morning continued, and somewhere forward in a place no one could name, in an unclassified conversation, a document 23 pages long was being read by people whose lives might depend on what it said. The panel convened on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the meeting. Walker had driven Emma to exactly as the silver-haired woman had said it would. Walker was not allowed in the room. I had known this going in. The review board was closed session classified, and his role in the proceedings had ended the moment he submitted his documentation and made his calls and handed Emma the thread she needed to pull. That was his lane. He had shot it clean. Now it was hers. He drove her again anyway. She didn't ask this time. He simply texted her at 6 a.m. and said leaving at 7, and she was outside her building at 6:58 in the gray hoodie. The same folder, the same composed exterior that Walker had come to understand as not indifference, but the particular kind of courage that didn't announce itself. They drove in silence for most of it. At a red light about 4 minutes from the building, Emma said Caldwell is going to be there. Walker looked at her. In the room. Required to attend, she said. Standard procedure for a named subject in a formal review. She looked straight ahead. I'm going to have to say everything I said 10 days ago in a room where he's sitting 6 feet away. Walker said nothing for a moment. The light changed. He drove. Are you okay with that? He said finally. Emma was quiet for a beat. No, she said. Then but I'm going to do it anyway. Walker nodded. Good, he said. He waited in the same hallway as before. Same bad coffee machine, same training manual he still couldn't retain. But this time the waiting had a different quality. Not the open-ended uncertainty of the first meeting, but the specific taut tension of something that had been building for months and was now resolving one way or another in a room he couldn't enter. He waited 4 hours and 51 minutes. When the door opened, Emma came out and Walker stood up and looked at her face and knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. Not in a visible dramatic way. Not tears or relief or the theatrical release of someone who has just been vindicated in a movie. Just a quality of settled stillness that was different from her usual controlled stillness. This one didn't have anything braced underneath it. She walked straight to him. She said, "It's done." Walker said, "All of it." "All of it," she said. "Caldwell is being referred for a formal accountability review. The operation is being officially reclassified to reflect the actual sequence of decisions and their outcomes." She paused. "And the people who were listed as administrative losses are being reclassified as operational casualties with full honors." Walker went very still. "The names," he said slowly. "The people from the operation. They're getting their names back," Emma said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady and absolutely controlled. And Walker understood that the control was the only thing standing between her and something she wasn't going to do in this hallway. "They're getting their records corrected. Their families are being notified." She stopped, took one breath. Then they existed officially, finally. Walker didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would have been adequate to what he was looking at, which was a woman who had carried the names of her dead for 3 years in silence, because the institution that sent them to die had found it convenient to pretend they never lived, and who had just watched that institution reverse itself in a closed room 6 feet from the man responsible. He put his hand on her shoulder. Just that. She didn't move away from it. They stood there for a moment in the hallway. Then Emma straightened. The composure came back fully, not the old armor of it, but something lighter, something that didn't need to be as thick because what it was protecting had just gotten a little smaller. "Take me to the range," she said. He took her to the range. She shot for 3 hours and didn't say a word. And Walker sat on the bench and watched and understood that this was what Emma Carter did with things too large for language. She gave them to the rifle. She gave them to the distance. She gave them to the absolute present tense focus of sending rounds downrange with precision. And somewhere in that process, the things that were too large became, if not smaller, at least more portable. At one point, Donovan sat down beside Walker on the bench. He didn't ask how the panel went. He looked at Emma shooting and read the answer in the quality of her movement. "Good," he said quietly. "Yeah," Walker said. "They watched her for a while." "Reyes called again this morning," Donovan said. "Before you got in." Walker looked at him. "The document," Donovan said. He ran a modified version of her framework with the platoon over 72 hours. Pre-engagement environment reading the indicator, identification protocol, the patient's discipline sequence. He paused. They flagged an ambush setup that their previous pattern would have walked directly into. Walker felt the words land in his chest. "Everyone came home," Donovan said simply. Walker looked at lane 7. Emma was setting up her next shot, still, precise, completely present in the way she was always completely present when she had a rifle in her hands and a target at distance. "She's going to want to know that," Walker said. "I know," Donovan said. "I thought you should tell her." Walker walked to lane 7 when Emma paused between sequences. She looked up at him, reading his expression, the way she always read everything immediately and completely. "Reyes," Walker said, "his platoon used your framework over the past 72 hours. They flagged an ambush setup they would have walked into." Emma held his gaze. "Everybody came home," Walker said. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Emma turned back to her rifle. She went through the motions of resetting her position, adjusting her scope, checking her data for the next sequence. All the normal mechanical actions of a shooter preparing for a shot. And Walker watched her hands, and this time they were not steady at all. Not even slightly, and she let him see it without hiding it, which told him everything about how much had changed in the past few months. She fired. The round hit center mass at 1100 meters. She fired again, center, four more. All center. She set the rifle down and put her palms flat on the bench and breathed for a moment. And Walker stood beside her lane and said nothing, and understood that this was what it looked like when someone received the confirmation that the most terrible trade of their life had produced something worth the cost. Not okay, not fixed, but worth it. Finally, undeniably worth it. After a long moment, she said, "What are their names?" "I don't know," Walker said. "Reyes didn't say." "The ones who came home," she said. "I'll find out," Walker said. She nodded once. The following Monday, Walker received an email from the Training Command Curriculum Committee. The subject line read, "Framework Integration Advanced Sniper Pipeline Approval." He read it twice. Then he printed it and walked to the range and handed it to Emma without saying anything. She read it, standing up the paper in both hands, and Walker watched her read it the way he had watched her shoot, with the complete attention she gave to everything that mattered. The framework was being integrated into the advanced sniper training pipeline. All service branches, Marine Scout snipers, Army Special Forces, SEAL teams, Ranger sniper elements. The curriculum revision would begin with the next training cycle 4 weeks out. The document would be attributed to a classified source, which was the language they used when the actual author couldn't be named yet, which was the language Walker had negotiated as a placeholder until the formal review outcomes cleared the attribution question. Emma set the paper down. She picked up her rifle. She shot, and Walker understood that this was her answer and that it was the only answer she needed to give. The ceremony happened 3 weeks later, though ceremony was probably too grand a word for what it actually was. It was a graduation, advanced sniper course class completion, the standard formal conclusion of a training pipeline that had been running at Coronado for 20 years. 31 candidates completing their certification across 4 service branches, standing in the morning air in their respective service uniforms, listening to the remarks that Walker had been asked to deliver because he was the senior instructor of record for the training cycle. Emma was not on the program. She had not been listed as an instructor formally because the attribution question was still being worked through channels that moved at their own pace. She was present as what she had always officially been, a guest shooter with a range pass, standing near the back of the assembled group in her gray hoodie watching. Walker delivered his remarks. He talked about patience and discipline and the specific kind of courage that long-range precision work demanded. Not the loud, aggressive courage of close-quarters combat, but the quiet courage of stillness, of trusting what you knew, when everything in your body was telling you to move, to act, to stop waiting. He talked about the difference between shooting at the target and shooting at the fear. He saw Kowalski in the assembled group standing straight in his Marine dress uniform, and he saw the moment Kowalski registered what Walker was referencing and what it meant, and he saw the young Marine's jaw tighten with something that wasn't grief but lived in the same neighborhood. He talked about the space between heartbeats. He saw Delgado's eyes go still in the way they went still. Now, when he was in his best shooting state, the stillness Emma had taught him to find and trust. He talked about handing over what you know to the people who come after you, and about how the truest measure of a warrior was not what they accomplished, but what they made possible for others to accomplish. He did not say Emma Carter's name, but every person on that range who had worked with her knew exactly who he was talking about. When the formal portion ended and the group broke into the informal clusters of a graduation, Walker made his way to where Emma was standing near the back. She had watched the whole thing with the same quality of attention she gave everything, and Walker had been aware of her presence the entire time, the way you were aware of the most important thing in a room, even when you weren't looking directly at it. "Good remarks," she said when he reached her. "I had good material," he said. She looked at the assembled graduates. At Kowalski talking to his peers with the easy confidence of someone who had recently discovered something real about himself. At Torres running his hand through his hair and laughing at something, the looseness of a young man who had stopped fighting a particular internal war. At Delgado standing with the particular stillness that had become his signature, the stillness of someone who had learned to inhabit the space between their own heartbeats. "They're good," Emma said quietly. "They're going to be better," Walker said, "because of the pipeline revision, because of your framework. Every class that comes through from here forward is going to have something in their foundation that wasn't there before. Emma nodded slowly. "Does that feel like enough?" Walker said. He meant it as a genuine question, not rhetorical, not leading, just asking. She thought about it in the way she thought about everything, fully, without rushing. "It feels like a start," she said. Walker accepted that because she was right. It was a start. The review outcomes were still being processed. The attribution question was still being worked. The formal recognition of everything she had done and everything it had cost her was still somewhere in the pipeline, moving at institutional speed, which was to say slower than anyone who cared about it wanted it to move. None of it was finished, but the framework was in the curriculum. The names of her dead were being corrected in the official record. Somewhere forward operators were coming home from places that should have killed them because of 23 pages written between midnight and 4 a.m. by a woman in a gray hoodie sitting alone in a house in San Diego. Start was the right word. Then Harris appeared. The young candidate Walker had pointed toward Emma on her first fully reinstated morning, the one who had asked who she was and accepted the answer with a quiet okay that Walker had never stopped thinking about. Harris had been one of the 31 graduates, and he was still in uniform, and he was making his way toward where Walker and Emma were standing with the specific, purposeful movement of someone who had decided to do something difficult and committed to it before they could talk themselves out of it. He stopped in front of Emma. He was maybe 23 years old. He had good eyes and the careful posture of someone who had learned to be deliberate about how he moved in the world. He looked at Emma Carter and he said, "I know I'm not supposed to know who you are." Emma held his gaze, said nothing. "But I know what you did," Harris said. "Not the details, just what it cost. That part I understand." He paused. "My instructor told me to pay attention to everything you did and everything you said because it would bring me home from places that should kill me." He paused again. "I just wanted you to know that I paid attention. All of it." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. The same word Walker had used with the same specific weight, not casual acknowledgement, but real recognition of something real. "I'm deploying in 6 weeks," Harris said. Emma nodded. "I'm going to use everything," he said. "The space between, the weight, not shooting at the fear." He held her gaze. "I'm going to come home." Emma looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. And the certainty in her voice was the same certainty she brought to every shot. Not hope, not wishful thinking, not the fragile optimism of someone who wanted something to be true. Certainty, the earned paid for certainty of someone who understood the mechanisms well enough to trust the outcome. Harris nodded once, turned and walked back to his peers. Emma watched him go. Walker watched her watch him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Donovan appeared beside them, the way Donovan always appeared quietly and without announcement. He looked at where Harris had rejoined his group. He looked at Emma. He reached out and put his rifle in her hands. Just like the first time. The same motion. The same deliberateness. Both hands. His personal rifle, the one he had carried through 3 combat deployments. The one he maintained with ritual precision. The one he had handed to her 4 months ago, on a morning when the entire range had gone silent and nobody had known what they were witnessing. But everyone had understood it was significant. Emma looked at the rifle. She looked at Donovan. He stepped back. 1 step. 2. 3. Emma held the rifle for a moment. She looked out at the range now empty of the formal proceedings, returning to the everyday reality of a training installation doing its work. She looked at the targets in the distance. She looked at the distance itself, the honest, uncheatable, non-negotiable distance between the firing line and where the rounds were supposed to go. Then she turned. She looked at the group of graduates still gathered in their informal clusters, talking, laughing, moving through the particular loose relief of people who have completed something difficult and can finally breathe. She found Harris. "I was talking to 2 other graduates, animated, using his hands in the way young men did when they were telling a story they were excited about. He looked like what he was, a young man with everything still ahead of him, deployments and decisions in the specific crucible of operational life that would either make him or break him, depending on what he carried into it." Emma walked towards him. Harris saw her coming and stopped talking. She held out the rifle. Both hands, Donovan's rifle, the one that had been handed to her, the one she was now handing to someone else. Harris stared at it. He understood what it meant. Walker could see him understanding. It could see the moment of the weight of the gesture landed the recognition of what was being passed and what it required and what it meant about what she believed about him. "Ma'am," Harris said. His voice was very young. "Your turn," Emma said. Harris reached out and took the rifle. His hands were steady. Emma stepped back. She stepped back the way Donovan had stepped back for her. The same deliberate 3 paces, the same complete clearing of the space. The same absolute trust communicated without a single word. Harris held the rifle for a moment. He looked at it, then he looked at the range, then he looked at Emma. "What if he stopped. "You won't," she said. He looked at the range again. He raised the rifle. Walker watched from where he stood beside Donovan, and he felt something move through him that was not a feeling. He had a good word for something between recognition and grief and pride, in the specific ache of witnessing a thing that mattered, the ache that came from knowing you were in the presence of something that would continue after you were gone. Harris fired. The round hit center at 900 meters. He fired again. Center, again, center. He lowered the rifle and turned back to Emma. She was already walking away. He watched her go. Oh, and Walker saw on Harris's face the expression he had seen on every face that Emma Carter had touched, the rearranged expression, the look of someone whose understanding of what was possible had just been quietly relocated. Then Harris turned back to the range. He fired 3 more rounds, all center. Walker moved to stand beside Donovan again. They watched Emma walk the length of the range without hurrying, her rifle case over her shoulder, her gray hoodie, her quiet. Moving with the same economy she had moved with the first morning Walker had seen her, the economy of someone who had learned that existing loudly got people killed and had refined it into something else, over years, not hiding, but precision, not erasure, but focus, the distillation of everything unnecessary down to what remained. "She's not going to stop," Donovan said. "No," Walker agreed. "Every time we think she's done, she's not done," Walker said. "She's never going to be done." He watched her reach the edge of the range and pause for just a moment, looking back at the graduates at Harris, still at the firing line, at the whole complicated human machinery of young people preparing to go to places that would test them beyond what they thought they could survive. "That's who she is. That's who she's always been." Donovan was quiet for a moment. "The attribution review came back this morning," he said. Walker went very still. "When email hit my inbox at 6:42, I was going to tell you after the ceremony." Donovan reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper. He held it out. Walker took it, unfolded it, he read it, then he read it again. The formal review had concluded. The attribution question was resolved. The framework document, 23 pages written between midnight and 4 a.m. now integrated into the advanced sniper training pipeline across all service branches, was being formally credited in the updated curriculum documentation to its author, Emma Carter, Classified Civilian Instructor Special Programs. Her name, her work, on record, officially. Walker looked up. Emma was gone. She had walked off the range while he was reading, moving with the quiet efficiency that made her easy to lose if you weren't paying attention, and she had stepped through the gate and was somewhere in the parking area or the street beyond, already on her way back to the house in San Diego, in the evening that would be whatever it was going to be. He pulled out his phone and called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Check your email," he said. A pause. "Walker." "Check your email," he said again. "Right now." He heard movement. Keys, the sound of someone sitting down somewhere, maybe in a car in the parking area, maybe still on the walk. He didn't know. Then silence. The kind of silence that had weight and texture, and the quality of something being received for the first time after being refused entry for a very long time. "Walker," she said. Her voice was completely even, and Walker heard everything under the evenness, the entire structure of what it cost to maintain it, and he did not say anything that would have required her to respond to it, because some things you honored by not naming them. "It's real," he said simply. "Your name, your work, on record." The silence continued for another moment. "They know I exist," she said finally. "They know you exist," Walker confirmed. He heard her exhale. Just that, one slow breath let out fully, the kind of breath that carried 3 years of held weight out with it. "The people from the operation," she said. "Their names are on record now too." "Yes," Walker said. "We all existed," she said. "You all existed," Walker said. "You all exist." The line was quiet for a long time. Walker stood at the edge of the range in the afternoon light and listened to Emma Carter exist on the other end of the phone, which was the most honest way he could describe what he was experiencing. The simple, profound reality of a person who had been told, in every official way available, that they did not exist, now being told the opposite and sitting in that truth for the first time. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay," he said. "Okay." And there was something in her voice that had not been there before. Something that was not lightness exactly. Emma Carter was not a light person and never would be. She was built of too much real experience for that. But something that was not entirely heavy either. Something that existed in the honest middle space between what she had carried and what she had given away. "I'm going to go home, and tomorrow morning I'm going to come to the range." 6 o'clock, Walker said. 5:58, she said. He almost smiled. "I'll have the coffee ready." "Don't," she said. "Your coffee is terrible." He did smile then. He couldn't help it. Noted. "Good night, Walker." "Good night, Emma." The line went quiet. Walker pocketed his phone and turned back to the range. Harris was still at the firing line, still working, running sequences with Donovan's rifle in a posture that already looked different from how he had stood at the start of the ceremony. The stillness was in him now, the space between, the thing Emma had given him, that was not technique but habit of attention, not skill, but a way of being present that would serve him in places he couldn't yet imagine. Walker watched him shoot. I thought about Kowalski somewhere in his next assignment, now carrying the certainty that his body knew things his fear had been overriding. He thought about Torres, about Delgado, about Webb. He thought about all the names Reyes hadn't given him, the operators who had come home from places that should have killed them, because a woman wrote 23 pages in a single night. He thought about the names being corrected in official records, the dead receiving the designation of existence that the living had denied them. I thought about a deputy director sitting in the wreckage of a review board decision, finally accountable for decisions that had been buried under the weight of institutional convenience for 3 years. He thought about the gray hoodie, about 5 shots at 1,100 meters, about Donovan handing over his rifle and stepping back, about a voice saying "your turn" with the absolute certainty of someone who had already seen the outcome clearly. Walker picked up his range bag. He looked at Harris one more time. Harris fired. Center. Walker turned and walked off the range. Behind him, the firing continued. Young operators running their drills, building the foundation of what they would carry into the field, into the places that would test them, into the dark, in the distance, in the long space between the trigger and the target, where everything that mattered happened. They carried what their instructors had given them. Their instructors carried what Walker had given them. And all of it, every patient correction, every quiet conversation in an adjacent lane, every moment of stillness demonstrated rather than described, carried at its foundation what Emma Carter had brought to a range in an old gray hoodie on an October morning when she was supposed to be nobody and had turned out to be the most important person there. The tradition had already started. Walker didn't know exactly when it had spread beyond Coronado, or who had carried it first to a different installation, a different unit, a different service branch. But it had spread. It moved the way the best things moved in close-knit communities, not through official channels or curriculum documentation or formal policy, but person to person, instructor to candidate, veteran, operator, to the young ones still learning what they didn't yet know they didn't know. Sometime in the year that followed, Walker heard from a Marine Scout sniper instructor in Virginia who described doing it for the first time and not knowing where it had come from, just knowing it felt right. He heard from an Army Ranger sniper element in Fort Liberty who had started it independently, which meant it had been arrived at rather than received, which meant it was the kind of truth that existed independently of its source. He heard from Kowalski, who had done it for a junior Marine who was losing his confidence in a qualification cycle, who had taken off his own rifle and handed it over and stepped back and said the 2 words, and watched the young Marine's face change the way all their faces changed when someone they respected handed them what they trusted most and said they were ready for it. He heard from Harris a year after the graduation in an email that was 7 sentences long and contained no classified information and everything that mattered. Harris had written, "I used it last week. There was a kid in our unit losing his confidence before a qualification. I gave him my rifle. I stepped back. I said, 'Your turn.' He shot perfect. I thought you should know." Walker read the email twice, then he forwarded it to Donovan, and then he forwarded it to Emma. She replied in 3 words, "Tell him good." Walker did. He sent Harris a one-line reply. She says good. He imagined Harris reading that wherever he was in whatever forward operating environment he was currently occupying, reading those 3 words from a woman whose name he barely knew, and understanding exactly what they meant and exactly what they were worth. He imagined the rifle being handed over again and again and again, down through the generations of operators coming through the pipeline, carrying the framework and the patience and the habit of attention and the specific courage of stillness, carrying all of it forward into places that would test it and prove it and occasionally save their lives because of it. Carrying without knowing her name, in most cases, the most important thing Emma Carter had ever done, which was not the shooting. It was never the shooting. It was what she handed over and to whom and with what quality of trust and what she had the courage to say when she did it. 2 words. Your turn. That was the whole lesson. That had always been the whole lesson. Not the rifle, not the technique, not the 1,000 hours of practice that produced the ability. The willingness to hand it to someone else and step back and trust that what you gave them was enough to carry them where they needed to go. Emma Carter had been erased once. She had been told she did not exist, and she had survived it, and she had rebuilt herself from nothing, and she had walked back into the one place that mattered and made herself impossible to ignore. And she had given every operator she touched the most expensive thing she owned, and she had written 23 pages in the dark for people she would never meet, and she had said the names of her dead out loud in a room with the man responsible for their deaths, and she had handed her rifle to a young man named Harris and stepped back and said, "Your turn," with the certainty of someone who could already see what he was going to become. And now her name was on record, and the names of her dead were on record. And somewhere in the curriculum of every advanced sniper training program in the United States military, in the section on environmental awareness and pre-engagement pattern recognition, there were 23 pages that bore her name and carried her knowledge forward into every operator who would go through the pipeline for the next 10 years and the 10 years after that and the 10 years after that. She still wore the gray hoodie. She still arrived before 6. She still shot alone in the early mornings before the range filled up, running her sequences with the unhurried precision of someone who had made peace with the pace required to do the thing correctly. But she was no longer invisible, and she no longer needed to be. The rifle had been handed forward. The tradition was alive. And every morning in ranges across this country, in the moment when a young operator loses their nerve and an experienced one reaches for what they trust most and holds it out with both hands, in that moment, Emma Carter's lesson lives. Not her name always, but her truth